Campers or rangers of Reddit, what's the most unsettling, creepy, and/or supernatural thing that's happened to you while in the woods? Story 1. Two tents, next to each other about 5 feet apart in the middle of the mountains. Had my 3 little brothers in one tent and me and my girlfriend in the other. It's nighttime and we have just put the fires out, so it's dark. Everyone is in their respective tents, snoozing off into dreamland. About an hour later, I am the only one awake, just daydreaming. Suddenly, I hear soft, human-like feet steps circling our tents over and over. Confused, I ask who's there, with no response, but continued footsteps, so I stepped outside. No one. Footsteps stop. I go back into my tent. Footsteps start again. I make my presence known and go back out. No one. Footsteps stop. Of course, I check on my brothers, but they are asleep and sound. I repeat the same process about 4 or 5 more times, believe it or not, lol. Footsteps always stopped. Ended up just going to sleep in the footsteps and not giving crap. When morning came, I asked my brothers how they slept, and they responded with, "Fine, except for you walking loudly all around the goddamn campsite all night." Story 2. I'm not convinced there is an afterlife, or such a thing as ghosts or demons. But I once saw something in the woods that felt so unnatural it made me second-guess how I see the world. I was hiking up a hillside, thick with trees, in the middle of the night during a long weekend. Some friends and I decided we would hike to the top of the hill and light off some fireworks. Approaching the hill and surrounding the base of this hill was a rolling grass valley. It was around midnight, full moon plus light mist, straight out of a horror movie. The strange part was I wasn't nervous or scared or anything. I was having a great night with my buddies. I didn't have any of my defenses up. My buddies and I just hiked in a straight line through the rolling grass valley approaching the hill, when something caught my eye. On my right, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing perfectly upright on top of a small grassy hill. It was standing right there next to a large dead tree. I couldn't make out any details. Both the tree and the tall figure were silhouetted under the moonlight. The strange part was seeing this figure didn't scare me. I didn't immediately sense any threat. I almost assumed it might have just been another hiker or somebody having a smoke. I passively turned my flashlight on it, and that's when it happened. In an instant, as my light hit that spot where this figure was standing, it instantly moved just outside of the range of my flashlight. Like it teleported or something. But just as vividly as I saw it standing in its initial spot, as my light hit that spot and the figure moved, I could see it standing just outside the range of my light. My breath paused. In an instant, a wave of dread washed over me. Something felt 100% unnatural about what just happened. As a reflex, I moved my light to the new spot where the figure was, and as my light passed, it disappeared. I've never passed out in my entire life. Not from heat, not from getting knocked out. Never. But at that moment, I felt my knees give away from under me, and I just fell to the ground. My friends turned and looked at me, trying to pick myself up, and my knees were too wobbly to stand. They helped me, and I tried explaining to them what I experienced. I'm willing to bet it was all just light/shadows playing games with my eyes, but I'll never be able to explain the sensation I felt. A feeling like I had just seen something I shouldn't have seen. Something so unnatural that my body's instinctual reaction to it was to go limp. Story 3. I used to spend a lot of time solo camping in and around the Indian Peaks wilderness in Colorado, and experienced some weird stuff. Nothing that was outright supernatural, but just unsettling. I love those woods, but they give me the creeps. Here are some notable examples from 4 to 5 trips up there in all seasons. 1. After thinking that a particular area under a tree and against a rock looked like a great place to set up for the night, I found a shredded sleeping bag and old, must have been 20 years or more, camp supplies. Found a lot of bones around the site too, ribs and vertebrae. Probably elk, but maybe not. I camped elsewhere. 2. Found a deer skull out in the middle of a recently frozen-over lake/pond. Major snow the night before, and the skull was sitting on top of the fresh powder, with no tracks anywhere I could see, and no other bones. 3. Woke up to a squirrel literally nailed to a tree outside my shelter. I had made camp late and tired and in dying light, so I might not have noticed it the night before, but I think I would have, which means it happened sometime while I was asleep. I have more if anyone cares. I love it up there. especially into the national park off-season, and the remoteness of the area is why I go. But it means that when weird things happen, they're that much weirder. A lot of the creepiness and happenings in the area are blamed on the so-called rainbow people. Not the rainbow family, they're fine. According to local legend, they're a group of vagrant hippies who started a simple living cult in the 70s to 80s, went up into the woods and just never left. More colorful tellings say that years of isolation and hippie philosophizing warped their minds. The police in small mountain towns like Nederland and Ward acknowledge the existence of small groups of people who may or may not be these folks, and warn that they should be considered dangerous. Apparently, they wander around breaking into remote cabins for food/supplies, and taking any drug they can manage to get their hands on. A close friend has a pretty creepy story about an encounter with a rainbow person. He was living in his father's house, a cabin off the grid near Nederland. No running water, plumbing, heat, electricity. Where he had a room on the ground floor with a bed directly underneath a large glass sliding door that directly faced thick woods. One night, he was woken up by the sound of something tapping at the glass. He checked his watch and it was around midnight. Half asleep, he blamed it on the wind and, without looking, rolled over to go back to sleep. Later, he woke up again. The watch says it's about an hour later, to the same tapping. He realizes something. There is no wind tonight, and the trees are still. Suddenly awake, he grabs the handgun by his bed. Mountain kids, am I right? Sits up and turns to look. There, not 5 feet from him on the other side of the glass, is a frail, hairy, dirty, ghastly man with tattered clothing and bloodshot eyes, staring right at him. At the sight of the gun, this guy scampers back into the woods, but apparently he had been standing there tapping and staring for an hour or more. We used to go into the woods and party during our high school years, since nobody would bother us and it was easier than staying in town. More than once, we'd be discussing the night the morning after and realize that in a group of 30 to 50 kids, there were 2 or 3 people who nobody knew. They showed up out of nowhere, talked with people, got high, and then seemed to vanish. Not hard to get away when everyone is drunk and stoned out of their minds, but unsettling. Once, one of them gave my friends a necklace made of a piece of, allegedly, wolf jaw, and told her to wear it in the woods so the spirits didn't hunt her. She didn't realize nobody knew the person until days later. Story 4. Just a few weeks ago, we made our way to a very remote valley that is very difficult to access. Think walking on 1-inch ledges, dropping into narrow crevasses, etc. The valley ends in a sharp drop with a waterfall that is about 100 feet high. We were almost at the drop when we heard a whistle. It sounded a lot like a hiking whistle, but we only met one group of people the entire day, and they had stopped way before we did as they thought the mountain slope was not passable. According to our calculations, that group should have long left and headed back to the base camp, so it made no sense. Then we heard another whistle. We yelled hello, and immediately we heard a whistle back. The whistle was coming up from the thick trees on the very steep slope of the mountains encircling the valley. The slope was about 75 to 80 degrees. The only way we could make it up there would be if we were pulling ourselves up by tree branches and roots because it was so steep. Just as we were debating whether the whistle was indeed a hiker's whistle, a helicopter suddenly rose from behind the waterfall. It rose right above us, then turned around and flew away. It was an unmarked helicopter, and the nearest airfield is about 100 miles away. We figured they had to have a search mission out for someone, so that must have been a hiker's whistle. However, it was strange that the person would whistle repeatedly but never yell back. We yelled again. The whistle recurred. Suddenly, we heard the helicopter rotor again. Not 3 to 4 minutes later, we saw the helicopter rise above the valley again, hover for about 30 seconds, then fly away over the mountain. We went ahead and crossed the creek to climb the mountain slope. We scrambled up, grabbing onto roots and branches. The whistling ceased. We yelled a few times and got no response. It took us 4 hours to make our way out of there after. The bushes were so thick that at times we walked on branches above the ground and I could not see my hand in front of me. I still have no idea who was whistling. It was a very mechanical whistle. I've been out in the wilderness quite a few times and have never heard a bird whistle that was anywhere close to that. Story 5. I came across a set of rock piles known as Chinese piles, out in the middle of nowhere. These being here means someone did a lot of digging back in the old days, so I started working and after half an hour had about 10 grams of gold and was having a happy dance when I noticed the small standing stones on each of the rock's walls. Each stone had several Chinese characters on them, and in a moment of dread, I realized they were graves. I put the gold in a glass bottle I found nearby and left it behind. I also took down drawings of the symbols to show a local historian who later confirmed my suspicions that yes, they were graves, and they likely hadn't been seen in 150 years. Chinese miners believed that if a miner died on site, the ground became cursed by the fallen miner's spirit, so they wouldn't continue to mine the area and would tell anyone they met that the area was worked out. Sometimes they would also do extra work to make the site look finished off, so people wouldn't end up digging up their comrades. I've been back several times, but I won't dig there out of respect. The site is super creepy in the morning fog. You can almost see people's outlines sitting around the piles. One of the stories my boss out here told me about was when he got involved with some sketchy folk from Prince George's back in the 70s and went with them looking for some mining gear to steal, so they could claim to jump a site a few kilometers down the road. My boss went down this forgotten path into a clearing with 2 ancient bulldozers and a small cabin. The rest went to the bulldozers to see if they ran, while my boss went into the cabin and was greeted by a skeleton laying on the bed with a bullet hole through his head. They brought in the cops, and they figured the guy had been there since 1935, since that was the last date on the newspapers inside. I went to the same cabin with him a few weeks back and found the place had been burned down. Story 6. I found Ghost Dog. That prompted me into a supernatural hillbilly baptism where I didn't find God, but might as well have. Then Ghost Dog vanishes. I'll have a go at the supernatural aspect of this question. This was maybe 7 to 8 years ago when I was 20 and in a really bad way. I've been messing up my life via heroin for the past year, but after lots of help/love/luck from friends and family, finally was getting my head cleared. Almost there, above the black tar hell I'd gotten myself into. I decided to get out of the city and drove 2 hours out to a smaller town in Missouri where Google Maps told me a small campsite by water was. I knew there shouldn't be very many campers because it had just gotten cold, about 40 or so at night. Nearly there, as I'm driving down a misty morning road, just a picturesque straight 2-lane highway, there's this object laying in the road about half a mile up. I slow my approach and see it's this shaggy mutt just hanging out. I stopped and rolled down my window right next to it. She came up, licked my hand, and wagged her tail a bit. She seemed to expect something of me. She had no tag, no tattoo for the chip, I later checked, and just a dog with no name. Naturally, I popped open the passenger side door for her and she was glad to hop in. So now I got this dirty but friendly companion for my little excursion. The dog with no name. The entrance to the campsite was only a half-mile further, and as I suspected, there was no one around. I just dropped a 5 in the honor box and picked the site closest to the stream. I set up my tent, the same one I'd set up for years with my dad as a kid, collected some dry sticks, not hard to do this time of year, and started a fire. The dog with no name just circled the campsite, looking content enough to sniff some leaves and roll around in the mud. I went to check out the river. About 30 feet wide, it had a man-made stone dam you could walk across. To the west was the deeper part of the river, sort of pooling at the dam. Then maybe an 8-foot drop to the east into calmer streams. Instantly, I wanted to go on. Cleanse myself, symbolize, baptize, whatever. I grew up Catholic, so that kind of stuff runs through my head to this day, though I'm far from religious. The dog sees me scoping it out the whole time from the campsite. I can't bring myself to do it, though. I'm hugely disappointed in myself, but it's cold, it's brackish, and I don't have a towel. So I go back up to smoke cigarettes, eat hot dogs, and pet the dog with no name. Night falls quickly after all this meditation, and I roll inside the tent to sleep. My buddy sleeps inside the tent next to the sleeping bag. This dog was freaking awesome, if you couldn't tell that yet. I wake up for no reason I can put my finger on, and my main source of warmth, dog with no name, is missing. I slide out of the tent. I guess I left it unzipped? And there she is, just sitting, waiting for me in pitch black, wagging her tail. I feel very strange, like something is happening here, and someone/thing is telling me to get back down to the river and do the damn thing. We walk down the short trail together, surrounded by Missouri black. It's even colder than before, but I start to strip anyway. standing on the chilly stones of the dam. The dog with no name sits on the edge of the river again, just watching me, a slight wag. I'm now stark naked as can be, staring into this black pool that looks like some supernatural ink. I should mention here that I hate swimming in water. I can't see the bottom of it. My fearful imagination takes over and I freak out. In other words, I stand naked on the dam for over 10 minutes before I finally muster up the balls, albeit shriveled and tiny balls, to say screw it and dive into the blackness. It was cold as hell, it was scary as hell. When I came up for air, I was thrashing wildly back towards the dam, scrambling back onto the slick stones. I shook out my hair and was surprised at how the adrenaline helped me in keeping warm. As I pick up my clothes and shoes, I look over for my buddy at the river's edge. The dog with no name is nowhere in sight. Back up at the campsite, I'm looking around, gently whistling, that kind of thing. I'm more than woken up now, so I go ahead and start another fire. Dawn is just starting to break. I have another hot dog for breakfast and figure I might as well just pack it up and leave. This trip feels more than complete. As I start my car up and check my phone, there's an hour time difference between the two. This happened to fall on daylight savings time. I'm not calling it a supernatural rip in time, but it is funny that the night this went down, in fact, the exact time would be around 3 to 4 a.m. when the dog disappeared. So the dog never showed up again, and I never shot up heroin again. Story 7. I had sleep paralysis while camping and thought I was hallucinating a wild animal trying to get in my tent. It turned out it was real, and it was an enormous bear. Camping with family/friends up in the mountains. Sharing a tent with my brother, call him Luke, and another friend, call him Evan. Luke, Evan, and I weren't tired when everyone retreated to their tents for the night, but the fire was dimming out and we were bored, so we went inside our tent to watch Adventure Time on my laptop till it died. We all passed out after a few episodes, and I woke up sometime during the night into an episode of sleep paralysis. I have weird sleep habits and experience sleep paralysis every few months or so. For those who haven't had it, basically you're awake but you cannot move, and sometimes experience auditory and visual hallucinations. I was aware of this, so I didn't have a full-on heart attack when I started hearing shuffling noises outside my tent, which continued and got louder and closer until the fabric of the tent itself was being touched by something. My computer hadn't yet died, so I could see my surroundings in the dim light of the screen. I watched the fabric compress as something pushed against it sporadically, about 4 feet off the ground, then moved around the tent towards me. I watched 3 distinct impressions follow this creature around the side of the tent. It looked like a claw. I was terrified and filled with adrenaline, but another part of me remained calm, assuring my body it was all a dream. I couldn't do anything anyway, so my fear was pointless. But as I continued to observe it, my sleep paralysis began to fade and I realized I could move. No longer so convinced I was dreaming, I reached over and shoved Luke awake. I tried to get him to look and see if there was really something there, but I must have sounded like I was sleep-talking because he just rolled over and went back to sleep, waving me off. Eventually, the wrestling stopped and I was tired and groggy enough that I quickly fell back asleep. In the morning, I'd completely forgotten about it. That is, until my brother-in-law, who was in the other tent, call him Dean, said to us, "It's a good thing we put the dog in the car last night. There was a bear here while we were sleeping." Dean pointed out the tree where we'd strung up our trash so animals wouldn't get into it, and the fresh, gaping claw marks about 9 feet up the trunk. It hit me like a truck. I had seen the bear and calmly watched it test the fabric of my tent 12 inches from my face. Story 8. On a road trip with a friend, we hiked into a trail in Colorado one evening to camp so we wouldn't have to pay for a campsite. Found a little clearing by a stream and my friend set up a tent while I decided to sleep under the stars. Right as we were getting ready to go to sleep, another woman showed up and pitched her tent in the clearing as well. I hadn't been feeling well that day, plus we had the hike in with all our stuff, so when I slept hard. Woke up to a ranger shaking me and asking if I saw where the bear went. Bear? What bear? Then I look up and see the woman's tent just shredded. Turns out she had left her food in her tent that night. We hung ours from a tree, and a curious bear came by at like 4 a.m. to have a snack. In tearing into her tent, it ended up raking its claws across her forehead as well. She decided to go, though why she didn't bother waking either me or my friend up to let us know about this very hungry bear nearby, I don't know. Anyway, pretty freaky thing to wake up to. I have no idea how I slept through it. That's what made it even more confusing/freaky when I was woken up by the ranger. I was definitely really tired and, like I said, not feeling great, so I know I crashed hard. We were also by a creek, so there was definitely some white noise of the water flowing, and the woman was on the other side of the clearing, so not right next to us. But was she just amazingly calm in the situation? Was she freaking out in total silence? I don't know. So maybe that's why she just passed on by on our way out. But we were two other females camping out there with her, so I'd like to think if the roles were reversed, I would have woken my clearing camping neighbors up, or asked them to help. I wouldn't call it a bear attack. More like the bear smelled something yummy in that tent, and upon a cursory examination of the object blocking said bear from that yummy smell, it realized that it quite easily bypassed this object with its claws. So I don't think it was like a roar, this tent and all its occupants right now so I can get to this food. More like, hey, something smells good in there, and my claws get through this thing just fine. Let me scratch a bit more and make it so I can get in. And in the process of getting in there, the claws also scratched this woman's forehead. I know the claws raked her forehead because the ranger told us. She was totally fine. He said she just needed a pretty big bandage, and she actually drove to the trailhead with the ranger to show him the right trail, but she didn't want to hike all the way back to the clearing. Yep, camping in bear country. If you can't, 1, put your food in a bear box at an established campground. 2, put your food in a bear canister, often used by backpackers. Or 3, put your food in your car in places where bears haven't learned how to peel back car doors like a can opener. E.g., don't put your food in your car in Yosemite. Then you want to hang your food from a tree. You hang it far enough away from the trunk on a thin enough branch that the bear wouldn't be able to climb to it, and far enough off the ground that the bear can't reach it by standing on their hind legs. If you get a bear on a unicycle or stilts coming through your camp, all bets are off. Story 9. This ended up being funny, but at the time freaked me out at first. My wife and I were camping in one of the national forests in the mountains in North Carolina. We were in a campground, but not a lot of people there, and the spots were semi-private because of trees and foliage. So, we had just settled down in the tent, and I was just falling asleep when, through my eyelids, the whole tent lit up. I jump up and go out of the tent thinking someone is messing around. Not a soul or any noise. Nothing. I go back in, lay down, and just fall asleep again, when it happens a second time. The same routine, jump up, check, and nothing. So this time, I lay down but stay awake, and have the tent unzipped, ready to jump out and catch whoever is shining a light on the tent when it all lights up again. And I saw what was doing it right away. Fireflies were landing en masse on the tent, and then they would all light up at once. I guess when I would jump up, they would fly off, then settle down again after I got quiet. I had a good chuckle over that one in the end.
What has been your biggest, I have to get the out of here as soon as possible, life moment? Story 1. I found a setup that my stepdad made in my room to record me after I was finished with the shower and was getting changed. Yes, I'm going to be that person. While many people may not see it, I think it's important I say this. There is an overwhelming amount of people who do not know how things like this happen, and a lot of people don't seem to know how to help either. Silence is what keeps kids from getting help. If you see something off, say something. You're an adult and are capable of helping. A child is not able to protect themselves, and there's only so much they can do. Be the person kids trust. Who knows? Maybe if I had someone I could trust and tell this to, then I wouldn't have to wait until I was older to remember on my own. Thank you for the overflow of support and people combating the trolls. Story 2. I was walking home from the gym in Seattle, and I would always walk by this weird house with blankets over the windows. There was also a fenced-in side yard packed with old busted RVs and garbage. This particular night, there was an old dude with a long white beard standing in front of the house in a bathrobe, smoking a cigarette. I had never seen anyone in front of the house before, and what I heard sounded like a Prius pulling up to a stoplight, but was, in fact, several Seattle police cars rolling up with their engines and lights off. I don't even know how they got that quiet. Then I saw a few officers approaching the house, and the old man with their guns drawn, completely silently. One of them made eye contact with me and made a fairly violent hand motion for me to go in a different direction. So I did, very quickly. About a month later, that house was torn down. I have no idea what happened that night, and I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Story 3. I had been sleep deprived for a few weeks during a very stressful summer. To pass the time, I'd go for long walks late at night, sometimes stopping at a gas station or supermarket to buy a snack. One night, at about 3 a.m., I had a sudden urge to walk to a 24-hour diner at the edge of my neighborhood. I was hungry and needed the exercise. I walk in, and the place is largely empty. The waitress comes, takes my order, pours my coffee, then disappears into the kitchen. About 2 minutes later, the door opens and a man in a trench coat walks in, pacing nervously by the register. I see him pull out a gun, and immediately my mind starts racing. I quickly conclude that there are a few possibilities. He's going to rob the diner and leave us unharmed. Or he's going to rob the diner and everyone inside. Or he's just going to shoot everyone inside, just because. The waitress emerges from the kitchen, unable to see the gun from behind the counter. I'm the only customer who knows what's coming, and the weight of the world is on my shoulders. Table for one? She asks. The man shakes his head. I'm here to see Jeremy. Okay, I figure. He's here to kill Jeremy. Although I wasn't a target, it was horrifying to be sitting so close to what was about to become a murder scene. I braced myself as best as I could for the sound of the gunshot as I sunk deep into my seat. Complete terror. There was nowhere for me to go. Should I remain silent when he killed this guy? Should I yell out a warning to Jeremy and risk getting myself killed? I clutched a very sharp steak knife on the table and went with my gut instinct. I was probably going to die, but I had to do this. I had to rush the shooter and stab him before he took the life of the cook. As I prepared to kill someone, Jeremy emerges from the kitchen with a wide grin on his face. You must be Frank. Out comes a wad of cash and up comes the gun, which is placed right in the counter. Looks even nicer than the pictures. Turns out they had met to sell and purchase a gun from a Craigslist ad. Most terrifying moment of my life. Judging from the many people I've talked to since, gun owners included, this was a very unusual event in every respect. I'm sure that the transaction was illegal, due to the weird and highly unprofessional way in which it occurred. If the gun had been in a holster or container, I wouldn't have panicked. Although his finger wasn't on the trigger, I felt uneasy seeing the firearm in his hand when it didn't need to be. Story 4. My ex and I have been divorced for 7 years. When she came clean and admitted she's been seeing another guy for almost a year. I'd been sleeping with the said guy in our bed while I was at work for a year. I noped out of there as fast as I could. It was no longer my house as far as I was concerned. My son is now 10 years old. He was 3 at the time. When birthdays or other celebratory events come around, there's always one on mom's side and one on my side. He has cousins and friends and relatives on each side, but I still always get an invite to a birthday party or whatnot from the ex. Why? I don't know. And every single time I accepted it, I sucked it up and showed up and sat around and made small talk with Mr. Davis, the new boyfriend, and all of their friends. Because I'll be damned if I'd be the parent that triggered the "How come Daddy didn't come to my birthday party?" conversation. But every single one of these events was agonizing. Nails on the blackboard, water torture, agonizing. I mean, all I want to do is punch the guy. Yet here I am talking about the weather and going to the local sports team. Usually, I figured if I made it past the cake to the presents and my son was running around shooting Nerf guns at the other kids, that was good enough. Time to make my escape. My son, thankfully, and at the same time sadly, put me out of my misery. Last summer, coming over the weekend before his birthday, he said to me, "Dad, here's Mom's invite to my birthday party. It is going to be small, just list of Mom and Mom's boyfriend's friends and their kids. But I get it if you have other plans. I'll see you next weekend at place of my friend's house where we too will be having a birthday party with a list of his friends. That's the one I'm looking forward to." Story 5. Chechnya in, I think, 1995. There were obviously a lot of those moments, but one that stood out was when I was walking back to the apartment block I was staying at. And I realized the entire block was not only empty, but all of the cars were moved out of the way, and there was a carpet laid out about 20 feet in front of me. I had no idea what was under the carpet or why it was there, but it just felt so suspicious. And of course, my first instinct is to run away. The second I turn around, someone from afar opens fire at me, presumably a sniper but could have been closer. I then heard shouting and screaming for men to run and get me. The shouts were far away. They knew they weren't going to be able to capture me. That f***ing carpet, man. I won't ever forget that carpet. My biggest guess was they built a hole under the carpet for people like me to fall into. Then they would capture and rape or torture you for whatever they would want. Lots of f***ed up marauders and bandits in Grozny during the war. Story 6. When I was 12, my next-door neighbor invited me to summer camp. My parents dropped me off, realized immediately that the camp was odd because the cabin counselor took away my copy of Jane magazine. Then there was a camp-wide assembly where we prayed over a photo of George Bush and spoke in tongues. Turned out it was a Pentecostal sleepaway camp. I walked to town and called my parents from a gas station. For anyone who's wondering, Pentecostalism is basically, it's a very rigid Christian movement that emphasizes all sorts of weirdness, including speaking in tongues, faith healing, water baptism, personal testament, and these very emotional services where people cry and weep and scream. This was not the Camp in Jesus camp, but it was remarkably similar. It was not Cole County, Pennsylvania. I'm not really familiar with much about Pentecostals, honestly. but a major component seemed to be this baptismal pool, a dunking tank. They had one in which everyone was expected to be publicly baptized in service, with the whole church attending. I remember the church leader also led a yearly retreat to Israel for public baptism in some famous river there. She would always kind of gesture knowingly to me when she said, "And then we went to Israel." And I'm about as Jewish as a Dunkin' Donuts bagel. In general, there was a lot of emphasis on saving, being saved, and the Holy Spirit entering you, which I had never heard of before this. The praying was done with a photo of George W. Bush sat in a chair. This was right around the time of some anti-abortion legislation in the early 2000s, and we were praying for his strength. Story 7. Every once in a while, your gut tells you something is up. I'm at a party and get that tingling in my gut telling me I'm not okay here. I finally just decide to leave with a few friends to chill at my place. A few hours later, I got a phone call from another friend asking if I was okay. Apparently, the house belonged to a guy who was affiliated with gangs. Some thugs tried to crash the party, and when they got kicked out, they started fighting people. A big fight breaks out, and a few people ended up in the hospital. Eventually, the house owner brought out a gun and shot a few rounds in the air, and that's when everyone scattered away from the area. The cops were called, and people were arrested. Meanwhile, I left hours ago, and was currently playing drunk video games with a couple of friends. Sometimes, your gut's right. Story 8. For a few months, I worked as a bartender in a very small pub in London. I'm from the United States. One night, I was overtaken by Irish travelers, and it was f***ing terrifying. Absolute madness. I did not know it was humanly possible to guzzle Guinness at such an alarming rate. And now I know. Yes, they were gypsies. I attempted to be somewhat kind to the world traveler. I did not know about them beforehand other than the good old TLC network, despite my unbelievably Irish heritage, so it was certainly a shock. I'm a young 20-something female as well, so let's just say I wasn't treated with the utmost respect that evening. Some paid, others didn't. Almost every single guy got beyond blackout level obliterated, and eventually, they were just coming in and out with random handles of vodka and chugging straight from them. The girlfriends and wives, straight out of my boyfriend gypsy wedding, all sat together in one section and were only allowed half pints at a time. It was bizarre. Towards the end of the night, I simply sat in a keg behind the bar in a corner, trying to process what the actual was going on before my eyes, and tried to avoid contact if possible. I didn't leave the establishment for obvious reasons, but a few of the local guys who drank at the pub regularly stayed with us to watch everything over. We stayed open well beyond close just to try and let it all die down without getting the cops involved. Every time I try to tell this story to my friends here in the United States, it's a total letdown because no one can actually comprehend who or what I'm talking about. Story 9. This was back in Russia when I was 14. I decided that it was a good idea to walk home from a party at 2 a.m. in a rural area. We had a summer home in Dacha outside of Moscow, literally middle of nowhere. As I was walking, a car pulled up and a guy, who looked to be in his 30s, asked me if I needed a ride. Being a moron, I said sure and got into his car. As he pulled up to the gates of our Dacha community, he stopped and asked me if I wanted to come with him to a party. He was a construction worker in the area with his friends. My heart skipped a beat, and as I looked at the car door to look for an escape plan, I saw that the door handle was missing from the inside, so I had no way of opening the door. At this point, I felt my heart beating in my stomach and I said, "No, sorry, my mom is waiting for me." All of a sudden he said, "Well, mother is a sacred thing. You better go." He got out, walked around the car, and let me out. It was the last time that I hiked alone. Story 10. I worked for a small family-owned business, and it was a mother and son operated store. They owned it together and ran it for 30 years. A month ago, the mother passed away. My boss, the son, didn't close the store and has cried in the lobby with other customers every single day since she passed away. He still tells everyone about it and is rude to the people that didn't play into his pity party. We even had new customers and he scared them off by telling them within 5 minutes of being in the store. Anyways, over the last 2 weeks, he's also been micromanaging like crazy and is starting to progressively yell when talking to me or other employees. However, last week he started wearing his mom's shop apron, started saying her euphemisms, and started eating her exact lunch. It's eerie because he's even starting to look like her. Yesterday I walked into the office and there was an urn in her desk chair. He said he placed her urn in her office so that way it's not like she ever left. The urn, full of her ashes, in her desk chair. He then said, "Now we can say hi to her." I walked out yesterday after that happened and didn't look back. Story 11. When I was 19, my dad's girlfriend, who just got out of jail for murder, moved into our house. He didn't tell me she was out of jail and moving in. I moved out that day and couch-topped for a few months, because that. They've known each other since they were children. I don't claim at all to understand what was going on through his head. But as far as I understand it, she has him believing she's actually innocent. They were dating before this happened. She went to jail because she was a nurse at an elderly home. One day, she decided it'd be a good idea to inject some old lady with insulin, kill her, and steal her credit cards. She's caught on tape at an ATM with him. That is literally all I know about the situation. No clue how she managed to get out early. I only learned these details from the local newspaper. It's very hard for a 19-year-old to deal with. Story 12. When I was 15 or 16, I got my hands on an edible brownie. My dealer told me it was really strong and to eat half of it. I thought I would have it before Thanksgiving dinner. I ate it, but didn't feel anything after about 10 minutes, so I ate the rest. I didn't know that edibles didn't hit you right away, and by the time that it did hit me, it hit me really hard. I was so high during dinner. I was making things very uncomfortable for my parents and my godparents. I refused to look up from my plate and was dodging questions. After about 15 minutes or so, I had to get out of there. So I just picked up my plate and went downstairs to my room. My mom came after me and asked me what the hell was wrong with me, and I explained I was really high and needed to be alone. Story 13. I was driven to work one night, and this lady had a broken down car, so we decided to try and be helpful. She lived close by and didn't have any family to come pick her up. She told us she needed to stop by the bank if we didn't mind, and we didn't. We took her to the bank so she could get $20 out to buy groceries the next day. She seemed down on her luck, and we knew what that was like, so we got $20 out for her. No big deal. She said she has another stop and had to tell her friend that her rent would be late. At this point, it is becoming a hassle and we are closing in on being late for work. I can't risk my livelihood for a stranger. After we got to the neighborhood, I became very worried. I told her we only had time to drop her off at her house or her friends, but it was up to her as they were both close. She started screaming at us and yelling that we would do anything she demanded. We stopped the car, I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You take your things and you get out of my car right now." She tried to leave without taking her stuff, so we would be forced to wait for her. I said, "Stop. If you don't take your things, I will literally drive away with them." So she grabbed her stuff and got out and we drove away. Story 14. It's the 4th of July, was setting off fireworks with family and friends on a dead-end road that leads into a cul-de-sac. A car parked at the stop sign facing us in the cul-de-sac and sits there a few minutes. We thought the driver was looking at a map. Suddenly, he just guns it towards us, swerved at a few people, and nearly struck a couple of my neighbors. As it kept going down the road into the dead end, the car almost went straight through my neighbor's garage door at the center end of the cul-de-sac. It swung around in a drift-like curve and sped past my neighbors and family again, but by then, I had noped the out and was frantically running into my neighbor's yard 2 doors down perpendicular from the cul-de-sac. I found out later that the guy was drunk, obviously, and had used his dad's car for the deed. No charges were made, but the dad had no clue his kid had used his car when the officer showed up. Story 15. My dad, sister, she was little at the time, and I were on vacation at the Grand Canyon. But we were still enjoying the view when she started laughing at something, so I turned around. She was marveling that her hair was standing on end, like when you rub a balloon and hold it over your head. I immediately recognized the situation and yelled, "Get back to the car!" 30 seconds later, lightning struck a few hundred feet from where we were standing. Story 16. In 2004, my parents filed for a divorce. My mom worked a traditional 9-to-5 job, and my dad worked as a contractor. It was my dad's responsibility to get us to school in the mornings, so my mom would drop my sister and me off before work. One morning, we were running late because we had managed to hit every red light en route to Dad's house. Typically, when we were late, my dad would hold out a sign that detailed our tardiness, but today he was not outside. Instead, he walked to the car from the house as we pulled up, walked over to the window, and handed my mom an envelope. Though the behavior seems normal, something felt wrong. As I turned to say goodbye to my mom, I heard a shit. My dad had shot my mom and continued to do so 2 more times into her thigh. Time seemed to stop, and I got my sister back in the car with her head down at the same time as screamed for help. I remember a gun to my mom's head that didn't fire when the trigger was pulled, and my dad responded by running back to the house and pulling the gun to his head. At this point, my mom had assured me she could drive. My sister was crouched in the back footwell, and I was trying to dial 911. I felt the need to get the f*** out as we pulled up, but I had to stay put through the entire situation. Story 17. I'm a wedding photographer. One wedding was taking place at a historical village. It consisted of 100-plus-year-old houses which were once disassembled, moved to their current location, then painstakingly reassembled inch by inch to maintain this piece of history. The groom's mother was the president of the venue's organization. She, of course, was very proud to host her son's wedding at the same place she volunteered at. The wedding was great, laid back and non-traditional. I stayed even a little longer than scheduled since things were so easy. Things finally started winding down around 11 or so, and everyone was drunk. But they had one thing left in store: lanterns. The kind that you light and then fly away into the night. Nothing is quite as romantic as lanterns. However, alcohol plus floating fire plus tall trees plus historical villages are not a recipe for success. While everyone tried to light their lanterns, the groom's mother caught wind of what was happening. She ran out into the village, screaming for everyone to stop. Drunk and distracted by the challenge, no one listened. Everyone kept trying to get their lanterns to take off, and one finally did, right into the lush tree that sprawled out approximately 20 feet above the village. This is when I thought it would be a good idea to leave. The lantern was stuck between some branches, burning ferociously. Groom's mother literally cried watching what she thought would be her beloved historical village going up in flames. Walking out, I saw the lantern narrowly drift through an opening in the branches and fly off into the distance.
Serious. Redditors who have been kidnapped, what was your experience like? Are there things you do now that you would have never done before? Story 1. My father kidnapped me when I was 7, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I lived with my alcoholic mother and her insane boyfriend. I wasn't physically abused, but looking back, the mental abuse and neglect were very traumatic. There were some borderline child called it things. Anyways, my father had visitation rights and picked me up every other weekend. One weekend, he came to get me and saw that I hadn't eaten much, food was almost always under lock and key, and my mom and her insane boyfriend were nowhere to be found. So my father told me, pack your stuff. We spent some time hiding out at different places with family, friends, even hotels in Laughlin and Vegas. It was like a mini vacation. I even remember staying at my dad's girlfriend's house when the cops showed up. I hid under the bed while they talked to her. At the end of the day, I never had to go back to my mom's boyfriend's house, and my father won majority custody. I'm not sure how I would have turned out if I'd stayed there. Thank you, Dad. Story 2. This happened when I was 6. I come from a third world country, and at the time, kidnappings were at an all-time high. We lived in a fairly nice neighborhood, no kidnappings there, no theft, great neighbors, and we felt pretty safe. Therefore, my mom wasn't too worried. Our house was a gated residence, so we had a front yard and backyard. I was out one morning in the front yard playing with some toys while my mom was inside working or cooking or whatever. Someone knocked on the front gate. Me, being a dumb child, decided to go up and ask who it was. It was this fairly old man who asked for some water. Me, being the nice, helpful child, opened the door and was snatched immediately. I do not particularly remember what happened after that, but I woke up in a compound which I'm pretty sure was far from home. They hadn't done anything bad to me as far as I know, but they did try to feed me food that I didn't like. I was a picky child, and so all I ate was fruit. They had asked for a ransom, which to this day, I don't know how much it was. They just kept me in a room all day with duct tape on my mouth and ropes around my feet and hands. They did take duct tape off to let me drink water or eat food. Anyways, a few days later, the police busted them and arrested them. They ended up in jail for life, which is what I was told. Not too long after that, my parents decided to move to a different country, and now all is well. I still think about what might have gone wrong if they had sold me into, child slavery or something. Fairly common in my country. Life resumed after that, and I'm as happy as a 20-year-old can be. Nothing really changed. I still don't know why I was kidnapped, maybe for ransom or whatever. In exactly a month, it'll be my 14th kidnapping anniversary. Story 3. When I was 20, I was stuck at a party with a bunch of drunk people, and fights started breaking out. I wanted to go home, but my phone died and I didn't have my keys or wallet on me, so I decided to walk home across town at midnight. I walked most of the way home when I came across a 30-year-old man on a bicycle who was chasing another man on a scooter up the road. Little did I know that he was trying to mug the other guy. I walked faster and kept my head down. The guy rode around the block on his bike, and when he knew I was alone, he jumped off his bike and dragged me into a bush at knife point. He tried to mug me, but when he realized I had nothing on me, he decided he would assault me instead. I convinced him that we would be caught at the side of the road and that he should come home with me. We walked for what seemed like 40 minutes, and he held me by the throat so I couldn't run. We got to a hill, and I offered to push his bike for him as it looked heavy. I kept the bike between us, and when we got to the top, I saw a taxi at the bottom. I threw the bike at him and ran away, screaming assault. I got blisters all over my feet, but I didn't care. All I cared about was escaping. He ran away, and luckily they could gather enough DNA evidence to catch him. He was recently sentenced to 12 years in jail, and I was very lucky. Lesson? Never walk alone at night. Story 4. When I was maybe 10 or 11, my neighbor kidnapped me. She was this single woman in her 50s who was always super nice to me. She was always on her porch, and she'd wave when I'd come home from school. Anyway, I was walking home from school, and she was waving as usual, but this time she was beckoning me over. So I went up to her porch, and she asked me if I wanted some meatloaf she made. I love meatloaf, and she seemed harmless, so I said yes. I expected her to come outside with a plate or something, but instead she called me in and told me to sit downstairs. I felt weird about it, but I followed her into her basement and sat down on her couch. She brought me a plate of meatloaf and I watched Pokemon 2000 on VHS. She had a freezer with those two popsicle things too. After I ate, I told her I needed to go home and she told me my parents called and asked her to keep me while they ran errands. I felt weird about that and suspected she was lying, but I just went along with it. I remember I asked her if I could get my Game Boy at one point from my house, and she said my parents told me to not let me out of her sight. I remember watching Men in Black and falling asleep. When I woke up, I tried leaving, but the door was locked. She left some banana pudding for me on the table for when I woke up, so I just had that and went back to sleep. She opened the door at like 5 in the morning, woke me up, and asked me if I wanted to go home. She looked like she had been crying. I told her yes, and she let me go. My parents asked me where I was, and I just told them I went home with a friend after school. I didn't have a cell phone, so it was pretty normal for me to be gone for a day. I didn't see my neighbor on her porch the next Monday, so I knocked on her door. She came outside and we talked on the porch about stuff. We never talked about that night, and she probably thought I didn't even realize what happened. She didn't say, but I think she had a kid who died a couple of years prior and wanted to fill the gap. I never hated her for it or anything. Until I moved a couple of years later, I would sit on her porch after school most days and she'd listen to my neat facts about space. Story 5. I'm not sure if this technically counts as kidnapping, but I was held against my will whilst something terrible happened and I couldn't leave. First off, just to establish that I'm a man in my 30s now, and even though this happened around 20 years ago, it still manages to get me sometimes. Basically, I was 16 years old and had run away from home. Looking back, there wasn't a good reason for me to run away. My childhood wasn't terrible, and I was just acting out because, well, I was a bit of a hardhead back then. On the second night, I found myself in the city center, just sort of wandering around near bars and clubs in awe of the sophisticated young adults who were all dressed and groomed, getting served drinks and basically having fun. A white van pulled up alongside me and there were two guys in it. One of them asked if I wanted to get a drink, and being a naive brain, I told him, yeah, sure. He got out of the van and went inside a bar to get a drink to bring out for me. I was too young to get in or get served. Even for a 16-year-old, I looked really young. Once he was inside the bar, my common sense kicked in, and sensing danger, I walked away. About half an hour goes by and the same guy pulls up beside me. This time he's in a car and his friend is gone. I apologized for taking off and made some excuse for why I did it. Can't remember exactly what I said. He told me not to worry about it, and we started talking. He told me that he owns a fashion store, and if I wanted to, he could get me kitted out at his shop and get me into some really good clubs. Because I was a wit, I thought this sounded like a good idea, and I hopped into his car. And so we get to his store, and needless to say, it was not what he made it out to be. It was in a rough area of the city, and even before he pulled the shutters up, it was obvious that this was some cheap discount sportswear type place. I started to tell him that I changed my mind, and he bundled me inside and pulled and locked the shutters behind us. He started to try and kiss me, and I said either I don't want to or I want to go. He grabbed the back of my hair really hard and pulled my head back and snarled, "Do you want to die? Is that what you want?" I'd never been more scared in my life, and I don't think I have been since. Needless to say, he molested me, and it was brutal. Once it was over, all I could think of to do was be extra nice to him so that I could maybe get out of there alive. He made some comment about having violated me, and I responded with something like, "What are you talking about? You didn't do that. I enjoyed it." I cringe at this now, and even though it was my survival tactic, I still kind of hate myself for saying it. Anyway, like I said, I was super nice and friendly to the point of normalizing what had happened just so that he could trust me enough to let me go. I told him that I was really hungry and asked if we could go get a burger. He said no, and this time I begged him and said I hadn't eaten in days. He reluctantly agreed, opened the door, and started to pull up the shutters. As soon as he did, I bolted as fast as I could, and I didn't look back. I returned home to my family shortly after that. Never told them what happened, though. So, yeah, I'm very cautious and wary of people's motives. I would never completely trust a stranger like I did back then, which isn't a bad thing, I guess. In a way, I was pretty lucky. It could have ended much worse than it did. Story 6. This is a long one, but it gets good. 2 years ago, I was very hungover on a summer Saturday in Manhattan. A girl I was seeing at the time was angrily getting her things together and proceeded to storm out of the apartment, which was shared by myself and 4 other guys. My old roommates had moved to a new apartment the night before, so there were boxes and miscellaneous crap everywhere. I was lying in bed, dying. It was around 9 or 10 a.m. About 5 minutes after the girl stormed out, there was a knock at the door. She must have forgotten her phone charger or something. So I got up in my boxers, walked across the living room where all the unpacked, half-packed stuff was, and opened the door. And behind the door was one of the scariest faces I've ever seen. Very beady eyes, thick mustache, scarred-up face, balding man in his 50s. I was holding the door slightly ajar. Since it wasn't who I thought it was, I stepped behind the door a bit to hide my pale-ass body and stuck my head through the crack. He asked if Billy was home, one of my old roommates. I told him that Billy had moved out the day before. With that said, he put all of his body weight into the door, sending me flying back. This dude was enormous. As I was recovering from this and trying to figure out why someone would be so angry with Billy, this gentleman open hand slapped me so hard I hit the ground. I was now awake. My new house guest identified himself as Big Tony and demanded to speak with Billy. I went into my room, right off of the living room where Big Tony was now setting up shop, and put on pants and grabbed my phone. Tony already had made it very clear not to call the police or try to run out of my apartment, or I might fall out of the window or get shot in the knees. Apparently, Billy owed a lot of money. I called Billy, who said he never heard of Big Tony, and Billy was convinced it was a joke. Tony asked for the phone, and I heard Billy telling Big Tony to go screw himself and to get out of his old apartment. Tony was now upset and started telling Billy that his roommate, myself, might get hurt if he didn't learn some manners and come to the old apartment. Billy hung up. Tony, for some reason, took a liking to me. He apologized for the slap, gave me some cigarettes, and said he hoped that this would all work out. He constantly commented on the fact that I was living like an animal since there was stuff all over the apartment, and asked if me and my old roomies watched betting sports. We never watched sports, never had cable. He asked if Billy's last name was something which it wasn't, and then asked if Billy was from somewhere that he wasn't, and then asked if Billy was enrolled in a university that he wasn't. I informed Big Tony that I was fairly confident he was in the wrong apartment, just as I was getting him to back off and believe that there might be more than one Billy living in an apartment building. There was another knock at the door. If it's the cops or your parents, I'm the maintenance guy, I said to my friend as my parents were coming to help me move out that afternoon. I opened the door and saw Henry, another one of my old roommates, walking in to get some things. I told him he had picked a bad time, but he was already inside. Tony pretended to be my uncle for a few minutes, but then I intervened and explained to Henry that the big man with us was looking for Billy, who he believed owed him money. "Henry, do you guys gamble?" I asked. "Yeah, we gamble all the time," he replied. "We often play dice and cards." I tried to explain to Tony that we didn't gamble on sports, but he had to go through the whole thing again. After another half hour of questioning with Henry, Tony realized he was in the wrong apartment. He called his coworker to get a picture texted to him, but it wasn't Billy. I wished Tony good luck and tried to get him to leave, but he insisted on taking Henry and me out for coffee and donuts to apologize. I refused, but Tony wouldn't have it. We ended up at Starbucks, ordering donuts and coffee, which we consumed in a nearby park while listening to Tony's stories. After half an hour, he said we could leave and we headed back. Of course, no one believed us. We had a party in the old and pretty empty apartment. I stayed at a friend's place in the building and woke up to knocks on the door. It was my buddy Tom, who also lived in the building. He told me someone was outside looking for me. I got dressed and went outside to find Big Tony, who gave me a grocery bag filled with beer and cigarettes. Tom and a few other friends from the building came outside and we drank beer in styrofoam cups on the street while listening to Tony's stories. Everyone believed Henry and I, and if I ever found myself in Tony's neighborhood again, he insisted that I call him for dinner on him. Story 7. I was a victim of parental kidnapping as a child. It was terrifying because I knew the situation was wrong and I shouldn't have been with my mother. But even when I could put together words to say that, I was scolded because, "No, that's your mother and your mother can't kidnap you." It was one of many events that made me lose all faith in authority figures. Since it happened when I was young, I don't do anything differently in my life as an adult, but I do get very annoyed when people complain about having to sign out their kid from daycare and face any sort of hurdles when taking their kid out of school or daycare early. Familial kidnapping is real and can be as traumatizing, if not more so, than stranger kidnapping. I was lucky that my mom just wanted her sympathy ticket. Story 8. Not much like the other stories here, but my ex-boyfriend abducted me from my parents' home when I was 19. He threw me in the trunk of his car and drove off. About 8 hours later, a lot happened in between, including me getting out of the trunk and into the back seat. The police spotted his car and engaged in a high-speed pursuit. He crashed into a tree, served about 4 years, and is out with a wife and 3 kids now. It didn't affect me as much as people expected it to, and I didn't really have changed anything in my life because of it. It happened in the past, and that's how I view it. Story 9. Every summer, my brother and I would fly out to Bethel Island, California to stay in my mother's houseboat. It was a place where there were no rules and endless days, and I looked forward to it every year. When I was 7, my mother sued my father for custody of my older brother and me. She lost the case because she falsified child abuse, having coached us to lie. But being too young to fully understand, I told the truth instead. After the court case, she was ordered to hand us back over, but she ran instead. I still remember the phone call we received while waiting at her boathouse. She told us to get our things and flee to the far side of the island where her boyfriend would be waiting with his boat to take us away from everything. Being pragmatic, I stuffed my backpack with Twinkies, knowing there was a good chance we would get hungry. We made it to the boat and snuck across state lines into Arizona, where we stayed on her boyfriend's ranch in the middle of the desert. The place had a table full of Playboys, a wall full of guns, and bees everywhere. My mother would leave for days at a time, trying to find a long-term place for us to go, but had no luck. Her boyfriend eventually lost patience and they broke up. My mom packed us up again and we moved from one bad situation to another. I could see the toll it was taking on her. After 11 months, we returned to her houseboat because it was the only place to go, but the police knew she would return sooner or later. They instructed the neighbors to call if they saw her, and within hours, several police cars showed up and my mom was hauled off to jail while my brother and I were moved into foster care. The courts investigated my mother's claims of child abuse, which took several months. Life in foster care was terrifying, humiliating, and degrading. I won't get into the nightmares or the abuse witnessed because people who've been there? No. For the rest, it's probably better you don't. Needless to say, I was immensely relieved when we finally returned to my father. He was a stern disciplinarian, but he backed off some after that experience. How did all of this affect me long term? I just turned 40, and I've never really put down roots. I could be ready to flee my home in less than 20 minutes because living on the move taught me how little possessions matter. This has made forming relationships harder, and I've moved around a lot. Only in the last few years have I really finally started to put down roots, but I still fight the urge to run sometimes. Story 10. My sisters and I were repeatedly kidnapped by our father between the ages of 2 and 4. He would take us from our mother, who had brain damage and a serious drug problem. He beat us if we made noise, locked us in a closet, and forgot to feed us for days at a time. Each kidnapping lasted between 2 weeks and 6 months, depending on how long it took my mother to realize we were gone and ask for help. He was a very scary man who just wanted the money from the state, food stamps, and welfare. He also tried to get money out of my maternal grandmother. In fact, she's the only reason the cops kept getting involved in trying to locate him. She had money and influence and used it. I don't remember much because I was so young, but I remember being scared and in pain and a uniformed cop opening a door and letting light in. I was terrified of being locked in the dark for years after, and sandy-haired men with mustaches can still make me very nervous. I'm 41 now. When I got divorced, my kids were almost the exact same age as my sisters and I when the kidnapping started. It was a struggle to keep those old fears in check. Story 11. I was kidnapped in February of this year by a local gang and held for 95 days. Sunlight, real food, and freedom are what I missed most. The gang had broken into my home last year and stole about 30 to 40 grand, so the leader thought they could get another payday by doing it again this year. Except this year they only found about $1,500 and some weed. I was left free after 95 days. 95 days of being treated like an animal humbles a person. I've changed a lot. I started 2 legitimate businesses as soon as I was let free. I'm going to leave this country at the end of this year, hopefully. Otherwise, I'm positive this gang will come back for a 3rd time. There's no reason they won't if they've already come twice. I'm afraid of what might happen the 3rd time.
At what moment in your life did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself, I'm in danger? I swam from a beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and current, I don't know, I was really struggling coming back even when trying to swim horizontally to the beach, etc. Went all lightheaded and felt really tired and just started thinking that this was it. I was going to drown and how stupid it was of me. Floated there for a bit and laughed to myself like a maniac about how stupid I was passing away like this. Eventually snapped out of it and started swimming again and ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how sea was and I just croaked, fine. We went from strong swimmer to negotiating with the ocean gods real quick, huh? Story 2. At my best friend's going away party. Hammered than I've ever been before or since. Barely able to stand when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. Host is a big, burly musclehead who just made sergeant. Stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too hammered to swim. Then I blacked out. Story 3. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town or village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first 2 wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Me and Felix have already been in the second first wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and the right. We were both sitting left having a cigarette when suddenly things went intense. 3 obviously intoxicated men came into that cabin. At first, they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them. But after a few minutes, they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel that they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he would understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the 2 of them wanted to rob us now and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me continuous updates about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up at one point and then stopped completely. I was wondering what happened and suddenly it all went black. We were in a freaking tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get roughened. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, "Are they going to do it now?" He said, "I'm not sure." After what felt like 10, probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like freaking Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight back in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to get to the next city as fast as possible. Story 4. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk into my apartment. I'd only been gone for like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him to get the heck out of my apartment. So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him he doesn't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Dude tells me that he's fresh out of jail and this guy owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. Dude tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the dude that's fine and I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. Story 5. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row canceled on me. But I was going home from a friend's house, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The driver, who eventually did show up, was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably also didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short, as in 4-second journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I had been thrown in a lake. They were both chuckling like, "Look at this rain," until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. At this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped, and then we both started getting alerts in the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped, and it was like, yeah, people pass away in these conditions. Both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with that all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced the genuine fear of there's a very real danger that I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home, and I've never been so grateful. He got a pretty big tip from me. And a hug. Story 6. My friend and I were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes, and I'm hanging off a cliff 30 feet tall and hanging on to dear life with 2 hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb, and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding on the rock for what felt like forever. Most likely less than 2 minutes until he managed to climb up and pull my back up there. Story 7. When I was in school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was never to split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we would have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on the patient. He seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I are having a pleasant conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he hung up proudly on the wall. I oblige. I like art as much as the next gal. I look, they're plenty nice, and then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is to let the patient get between us and the doorway, has happened. And he was not seeming so friendly anymore, which is when I thought to myself, well, darn it, I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me how he has to get out of here. I have to help him, and I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I called my preceptor to save my dumb self. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first two rules and get rid of the third one. Story 8. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season in the mini club, daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explained to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son who is mentally around 3 to 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept, but there are no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. It was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine realizing that I was lucky, but that also will be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day playing with this dude as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful just so that he doesn't get mad. Story 9. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had coded. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me into an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs and said we need to go up them, my brain finally kicked in and realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I was about to walk into a den and was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. Luckily, my friend had followed us in and appeared, so I phoned the ambulance and we left. Story 10. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside. Even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We made friends with the locals, and they took us down the river to where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. I start trying to cross the river, and the current just picks me up. Whoosh, and suddenly I'm on my back, trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream, and my feet are literally hitting rocks. No grip at all. It seemed like forever, but was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further downstream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown up to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really messed me up. Story 11. I told the story before related to some army threats, but it was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day, I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this basically is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's a thick tube at the base of the cannon that acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment and instead vents it outside. This entailed the sealed crew compartment to fill up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blind us all. So here I am, a 25 kg high-X shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I pass away, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coax machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port and pulls the smoke outwards when turned on, and opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. Story 12. Hunted wild boar, razorbacks in Australia. Since I was a teenager, 14, they wouldn't give me a weapon. They set a line of the teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line abreast formation. We stomp forward, pigs run the other way toward the hunters with the weapons, in theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push them away. Yeah, a 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound angry pork monster off me with a stick. I bet the boars went home and bragged about how they terrorized a bunch of kids with metal lids. It's their version of a fishing story. Story 13. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun. By myself because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't ski on, but I had come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the backcountry of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of hiking uphill and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow and ski boots, holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. And I make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I pass away, I can bring them down with me. Story 14. To put a long story short, when I was 16, I severely misinterpreted how long a hiking trail was. I discovered it a couple hours before sunset. I had never hiked it before, so I glanced at the map at the trailhead before setting off. That was essentially a loop with a slash through it, so I wasn't too worried about getting lost. I hiked it for an hour or so. I reached what I thought was the halfway point and sat for a while. When I got up, I decided to hike the rest of the loop instead of going back the way I came. Bad idea. The sun was almost down at this point and I had to start using my phone as a flashlight. Then I realized that I'm at 15%. At that point, the reality set in that I was a 16-year-old girl alone in the woods. No one knew where I was, and I'm about to lose my only light source. As I continue hiking the loop, I start to realize that it's much longer than I initially thought. I started to get frantic and ended up turning around. At this point, my phone turns off and I start thinking to myself, if something happens to me here, they won't find me for days. The rest of the story is essentially just me being terrified in the woods, but I did eventually make it back to my car unscathed. Moral of the story, don't be a freaking idiot and read the trail maps thoroughly if you're gonna go hiking right before sunset. Also, charge your damn phone. Story 15. Drove to a city an hour and a half away from my small town to party with friends on a Friday night. Had to check out a club. Shouldn't work there. Went back to her place. Friends left me and drove back home. They drove back the next day to get me, but we just ended up partying again Saturday night. Woke up Saturday morning and she said she had to go to a friend's house and didn't feel comfortable leaving someone she barely knew at her house while she wasn't there. So I went with her. Pulled up to her friend's house that had a chain link fence around the front yard with a couple pit bulls running around. He let us inside and I sat in the living room while they went to the back room for a sec. Turns out he was her dealer and she was getting her next fix. While waiting, a black Cadillac Escalade pulls up and honks out front. Dude runs out there with something tucked under his shirt and they make some kind of exchange and he comes back in. Still sitting in the couch, kinda, laughing to myself because this whole situation seemed too crazy to actually be happening in my hungover or still intoxicated state. Definitely thought this day was going to turn out worse than it did. Story 16. I once came upon a bad car accident, head-on collision. One driver was more or less okay. The other had bad injuries. As I got to the car, I could see it was full of smoke and flames were coming through the dashboard. The lady was trapped as the column came in on top of her a bit, so I jumped in the back, freed her from there, and kinda handed her out the back door to some other people who just arrived to help. I was left in the car as they took her off, which was fine, as I wasn't trapped, but I sat there for just a moment longer in the burning car filled with smoke and soaked it all in as it struck me that I could have passed away here and I got out. The car flashed over shortly after and burned to a crisp. After 2 life-saving operations, the lady was okay. Scared the crap out of me. Story 17. At 17, I decided to follow my boyfriend to a city I've never been to. I'm from a fairly small town, and this was the biggest city I'd ever been to. We're bumming around, and he tells me he's met this guy who saw us and invited us to smoke with him. I'm nervous, but boyfriend says he's cool, and since young me is an idiot, I say sure and follow him. But he says he has to pick some up, so we walk to his car, and I get in the back. We go to a park full of users, and he's flashing a wad of cash at us and talking about how great this is, blah blah. He says he's sketchy about smoking in his car, so we're going to his place. Alarm bells are going off, but again, boyfriend seems calm, so I keep my mouth shut and try to pay attention to where we're going and how to get back downtown. Buddy's phone rings and he tells whoever that he's bringing some friends over, a guy and a young girl. So now I'm panicking, talking real fast about friends that are expecting us back and how we're traveling with these great people and just trying really hard to not look like a drifter who will be going missing without anybody noticing. We get to this building and go into his apartment and there's a couch and it's covered in plastic. He puts in some cheap bargain bin videos and tries to offer me a glass of beer he brought from the kitchen. I'm an idiot, but not that dumb, so I refuse. He keeps trying to separate boyfriend and I, offering to pay for some booze if boyfriend walks to the store, etc. Eventually leaves the room for a split second and boyfriend decides it's time to steal his grass. Why? Buddy comes back and notices immediately. Starts to threaten us. He's got a bat. He's making comments, etc. I just completely break down and start bawling. I'm not great in a crisis. I'm sobbing. I'm telling him I want to leave. I want to see my mom. I don't want to have intimacy with him. Why can't we just leave? Blah, blah. He gets kind of flustered and the situation awkwardly calms down. We leave. Boyfriend and I have our first epic meltdown fight in a strange city. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. My ex and I broke up after 5 years together. Stupid me got more hammered than I've ever been. Drove to the spa where I proposed to her. rock cliff thing overhanging a reservoir. We made a campfire. It was the middle of the winter, and I was sitting there getting more and more hammered and certain I was going to end myself. Well, I stupidly looked over the cliff and intoxicatedly fell into the freezing winter water while it was pitch black outside. Somehow I got out and got back to the fire and quickly realized, oh yeah, it's the winter and I'm soaking wet. This is how people freeze. So I made the walk back to my truck, blasted the heater, and got more intoxicated until I passed out. I woke up the next morning feeling like an idiot. I've heard a lot of stories of people getting intoxicated in the woods during the winter and freezing, which made me realize how close to passing away I was. It was weird because I wanted to end myself for weeks and weeks, but I guess I didn't want to go out that way. I don't know. Those were dark times, but I'm glad it happened. Story 19. I was at a party at the beach. Some big college party. I knew no one. My friends were elsewhere. I was making conversation to this girl who was sitting sad on the floor with a beer. It looked like she needed company. She was shaken and didn't seem to want to spare too many words. I was worried. But then this shirtless bro dude comes marching over yelling, "Hey man, you want to freaking fight? I'll beat your freaking back. All my homies will join me." Now I'm a freaking geek nerd. This guy shouldn't be threatened by me at all, but he was. One of his friends nodded his head, affirming that yes, multiple men larger than me would totally be my back. Wow, I chuckled. But one of his reasonable friends behind him gestured and said in a way that the bro couldn't hear it, "Dude, just walk away. He's out of his freaking head, just walk away. He won't do crap." I had to walk past the bro to do this, and I said to him, "That's all right, man." He just yelled, "That's right, little wuss." Later that night, after the bar crawl, guess who I see being dragged back to our hotel? It's the bro. He sauntered over to me with the help of his bros keeping him up, and he says, "Hey, man, I'm sorry about earlier. We're cool, man. You're a cool guy, man." I just say, "Yeah, we're cool, man." And I laughed to myself because, wow, he could have ended me. His bros were willing to help him do it too, and in the end, he's out of his freaking mind. Story 20. On a road trip going through a town at about midnight, some car behind us beeped us because we didn't take off the millisecond the light turned green, so we flipped them off. Bad idea. 2 users in that car. One in the passenger side window hangs out the window screaming at us. We stop at the next red light and he jumps out of his car and starts ambling towards ours. A mate is driving and starts reversing his car so he can drive away. Turns out no teeth user had a freaking metal pole concealed against his leg. He gets one heavy hit against the car before my friend steers away and drives off. They followed us for a bit until they lost interest. Flipping them off? That's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Very unpredictable, pole-wielding bull. Story 21. I was sitting in a tram in Amsterdam and a clearly intoxicated guy sat next to me and started talking to me in a quite intense way. In a few minutes, he managed to regale me with most of his life story, including years of imprisonment and separate occasions for violent crimes. He showed me a plastic bag that contained 6 or 7 pork chops. He informed me in a hushed voice that he stole from a supermarket. I was looking forward to eating them, but had no stove at his place. Did I have a stove? He knew exactly how to cook them. He wanted to share them with me. The only thing I could think of to do to stop this potentially dangerous and very insistent ex-con from following me home was to quickly jump out at a stop just before the doors closed. Shouting back I needed to get something here. I heard him say, "Wait for me." I walked out without looking back, quickly walking past the back of the tram and heading to a canal. I quickly looked back while I was half running forward and saw the guy looking around at the stop, confused, unsteady, and clutching pork chops. I spent the next 10 minutes crisscrossing the canals and making my way to a bus to take me home. Needless to say, I shook quite a bit on the way home. Story 22. My ex-girlfriend and I were fighting. I'm pretty non-confrontational, and I was just trying to make an omelet in peace. She kept badgering me about how I was a failure, about how I wouldn't amount to anything, and that I was wasting my time with my studies. I just got accepted into an awesome DNP program. Who's wrong now? I reached my breaking point and made a single, insignificant but pointed remark about her choice of work. She's a masseuse by trade. It got quiet, and from behind me, I heard a bottle shatter on the countertop. I'm now the recipient of several large scars on my left shoulder and back. Story 23. I was rollerblading and bombed this hill. It was maybe a 60-yard path with a button hook ending. I didn't notice that at the end of the button hook were 2 large boulders, maybe 4 feet high and just as wide with sharp edges. Got to about 30 miles per hour before I realized there was no way I was stopping. I remember chuckling and saying, this might hurt. I had a game-time decision before I picked up any more speed and threw myself on the side of the path. Ended up rolling well past the boulders, maybe another 20 yards or so. Luckily, it was the middle of the night and the hill was grassy and well-maintained. Also, the dew helped a lot. Honestly, it felt like a slip and slide. I remember feeling as though I teleported. 1 second I was on my skates, the next I was laying on my back at the bottom of a hill. Patted myself down and I was totally fine. Wet, but fine. Story 24. I was fishing in Canada and noticed that the forest had suddenly gone very, very quiet. I was with another lad who had been kneeling down eating lunch while I fished. I turned around to move up the river and saw a cougar sitting on a rise behind us in the forest. I screamed and started trying to act as big and scary as I could while being the most afraid I've ever been in my life. It all happened in a split second, but I remember feeling absolutely helpless, knowing I couldn't reason with this wild animal. The thing gracefully just jumps into the thick of the forest, not making a sound. We were a couple hours in and had to walk out, which was the most terrifying 2 hours of my life. We did it back to back, shouting at anything to move, just knowing we were being watched. I rang Parks Canada when we got back into reception range, and the lady just said, "You're lucky. I've never heard of someone seeing a cougar before it attacked." Story 25. Fast Eddie. Fast Eddie was a local who was completely harmless and sober and even pretty freaking funny. When he got intoxicated, however, it was a completely different story. I'm a Mountie, and decades ago I was stationed to a remote northern Canadian detachment where the only access was flight. The reserve there that we policed was big, and there were only 3 of us, so you had to become friends with the locals or you would probably end up gone. One day he got really intoxicated and called us and said he had a weapon with hostages. He lived in a very remote location, and we knew he lived alone and knew it was unlikely that he did in fact have anyone else in the house, but nonetheless, we had to act. So the 3 of us set up a perimeter around his house and did our best to negotiate. There were no hostages, and Fast Eddie passed out. But the sound of our police pickup trucks woke him up, and he was grouchy at being woken, so he decided to scare us away with a weapon. He said he was aiming at the trucks, but I felt that bullet zip by my ear and strike the lamppost behind me. That was the closest I've been to being ended in my career. So far, he was arrested and charged without further incident, which resulted in some probation. Despite almost being ended by him, I loved Fast Eddie. He lived a hard life and was coping with it the best he could. When he was sober, he was probably one of the funniest people I've ever met. Rest in peace, buddy. Story 26. Snowboarding in Colorado. Took a spill into a tree well of a large Douglas fir. Where I had fallen, you couldn't see me even if you were riding about 10 feet from me, since I sunk about 4 feet below the level of the snow upon falling in and was stuck in a bowl-shaped depression in immediate proximity to the tree. Decided to unstrap my board and reverse the orientation of my body so I was facing out of the well, only to sink more. I remember it so vividly, being like quicksand, but worse. Any tiny movement of my body and I would sink a few inches. I ended up being in deep snow with my head approximately 4 feet below the level of the glades, running around 5 feet away. I sat there still until someone rode close enough for them to hear me yell. Totally understandable how people pass away in those things. Story 27. My friend, his girlfriend, and I were at the bar getting angry when the girlfriend overheard a couple of large men fighting. She decides it's her responsibility to stop their fight and inserts herself into the fray. The large men stop fighting each other and begin to pester her. She doesn't leave the situation because she's intoxicated and stupid, so it escalates to the point where we have to intervene. These guys are a good head and shoulders taller than me, and I'm a good foot taller than my friend, so I'm thinking we are definitely going to get manhandled in this situation. Girlie goes and sits down now that she's caused such commotion, and the large men start swinging at us. Luckily, I knew the bouncer, and he saw everything and helped us send the guys packing. But we took a couple punches because my friend's girlfriend is an antagonizing witch. Story 28. I was alone on a train from Zurich to Paris. I had a window seat, and a huge, muscly, huge man came and sat next to me. And then he started crying and shouting and punching the seat in front of him. I was quite convinced he was going to start punching me instead at any moment. He was not really on this planet and obviously really hurting about something. Sometimes he'd go quiet and I'd relax and start to feel better about the next 3 hours. But then he'd suddenly clap his hands together really loudly, making me jump out of my skin and go back to crying and punching the seat. It was quite distressing. At one point he got up and went away. I thought I was safe, but instead he came back with a croissant and angrily ate it while crying. Now I had crumbs to contend with, too. The second time he got up to look for more pastry, 2 lovely girls motioned for me to come and sit with them on their table seats. I did and thanked them in my terrible French. He came back, sat down, and went back to crying and punching the seat, but he was at least away from me. Then, 2 horrible American boys got on at a station. They were playing music from a phone, so I already hated them. They saw the empty seat next to me and the empty seat next to the angry, crying man, and they asked him if he'd mind sitting next to me so they could sit together. Obviously, he obliged, and I got to spend the next hour jumping out of my skin as he started bashing at the table instead. I didn't pass away, but that put me off train level in Europe for a while. Story 29. Friend's stag party. Ended with us camping out in the desert. I woke up to mooing and a cow with 2 much smaller baby cows near our campsite. Having had interaction with cows before, I thought I could just walk up and start petting. As I'm walking towards the cows, I realize a few things. We aren't near a farm or anything. These are likely some wild cows whose ancestors escaped domestication a while ago. And more importantly, number 2, cows, even female cows, have horns. As soon as I was maybe 30 to 40 feet from the cows, she lowered her head at me like a bull does right before they charge. I'm sure her motherly instinct was kicking in or something. I just turned around and laughed at how stupid I was just about to be, thinking I could walk up to a wild horned animal and just, pet it. As soon as I backed off, she and the little baby cows just wandered off and continued eating whatever they could find in the desert. Story 30. After my freshman year in college, I was fording a river on a solo hiking trip that seemed only 2 feet at its steepest point. Nope. Halfway across, I'm waist deep and the current is so strong that it knocks my hiking sandals clean off my feet, and the only thing stopping me from being flown down the river was my hiking stick and both feet firmly planted against the current. I knew that if I tried to turn around, I'd be swept away. And if I took a step forward, I'd have the same outcome. I had that self-chuckle, holy crap moment, but then decided to take off my pack and throw it as far as I could towards the bank and make a go at it. Threw it, missed the bank, jumped, ended up finally grabbing onto the rocky bank 100 meters downriver after a sickening battle with the rapids. That was stupid, but at least it got my heart moving. Story 31. I was working on my associates in a small village in another city. I arrived in the country at 8 p.m. Buses to the village end at 6 p.m. I got stuck. So I went to a hotel, right? No. I just started walking to the village, 1 hour drive away with gigantic bags in the dark. Then 3 people in a car approached me and offered to take me there if I paid them gas money. Sure, why not? We got to a gas station and I gave them some money, and they surprisingly actually took me to the village and everything went fine. Story 32. I'm Hispanic, but pretty light-skinned so I can pass for white. Anyways, I'm in college in North Texas about a decade ago, and we were at a house party in the middle of winter. There was this guy there who looked friendly enough. A big guy with a shaved head and tats, most of which were covered up by a long-sleeved shirt. At some point late in the evening, the conversation turned to substances. He mentioned that he knew where he could get some, so everyone pitched in and nominated me to go with him and pick up. I get in his car and he drives me to a part of town I'm not familiar with, all the while boasting that he could get me any stuff I wanted. We arrive at this fairly large house in a dark street and go in. There's a group of about 6 other guys and a couple of girls. They seem friendly and immediately offer me a bowl to smoke while I wait for the stuff. As I'm sitting there, I look around and realize all the dudes had the same basic look. White guys with shaved heads, lots of tats. That's when I look up and notice the big flag hanging on the wall. I kept telling myself, keep it cool, they think you're white. Be cool, don't act Latino, don't act Latino. We completed the pickup and he drove me back to the party, but for a moment, there I was, definitely like, oh crap, I'm in danger. Story 33. Oh, I've got one. Marching band camp, sophomore year. I decided to sprint full speed across the parking lot while pulling the very heavy water cart. I remember thinking how fun it was, then wondering how I was going to stop the car mid-sprint. Literally laughed to myself, going full speed, and thought about how dangerous and stupid the thing I was doing was and how there was no way it could end well. I didn't have to stop it, as it hit my heel and I went tumbling. The cart kept rolling and almost took out a few flutes. One surgery later, I now have a metal plate and 6 screws in my left shoulder. Marching band is no joke, kids. Story 34. So I woke up one morning feeling kind of empty, like if I'd lost more energy than usual. I slept my usual 8 hours, so it was a bit weird. Can't be the kidney stone I had a week earlier. Never heard of it being a side effect. I went to the bathroom feeling unwell and started retching. I thought, like an idiot. Guess I need more sleep. I fed the cats and went back to sleep, thinking I just needed a power nap of some sort to feel refreshed. An hour later, I woke up sweating like a beast and even more empty in terms of energy than before. I tried to get up, but it felt like I could faint just from walking. My roommate had already left for work, so I had no one to rely on. I dragged myself once more to the bathroom and felt like I was in a volcano. I was able to draw myself a really low amount of water in the bath and climb in just to try and reduce my temperature. As I got in, I felt a tad better, but I had no energy left and felt myself lose consciousness. My God, I'm gonna pass away in this bathtub. Luckily, I regained consciousness not long after and called the ambulance. Like an idiot, instead of waiting for them, I got dressed and limped to the lobby of my building because I did not want to be a nuisance to them and make them work harder by climbing to the 3rd floor. The EMT thought it might be okay since I walked by myself until I started retching again in front of him. Turns out, the anti-inflammatory they gave me for the kidney stone was something my stomach didn't like, so I developed a big ulcer that burst inside. Stayed a week at the ICU because I lost too much. Scariest crap to date in my life. Story 35. I was the night shift manager at Schlotsky's Deli. I worked with 2 other people, one a really good friend and the other a new guy who was about 4 inches taller than me and had a record.
Spent a lot of the shift talking to his baby mama on the phone at the front of the store, which anyone in the dining room could hear. When he started yelling and screaming, I told him to cut it out and that he couldn't spend a shift on the phone. I had to tell him a couple times to get off the phone, and the third time he said, "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Well, I'll just issue a report with the boss." To which he replied, "And what's to stop me from knocking the crap out of you?" I honestly looked at him and said, nothing is. And we stared at each other. Fortunately, my coworker said, "What's stopping you is if you do it, I'm calling the police and your back is going back to jail." He ended up getting fired for threatening manager, but I didn't get punched, which was nice. Story 36. Lived in Rochester for university. Terrible snowy winters, driving through an intersection in a 95 LeBaron. Lost all control and traction, just spinning in circles through traffic. My friend and I just laughed as he said, "You ready?" Meaning, "Are you prepared for the end?" Responded with, "I'm with you." There was a complete lack of control in the situation where everything was up to the universe, fate, chance, etc. Where you just sit back and let it play out. Didn't even turn the music down. Needless to say, we eventually missed all cars and several poles and came to a stop in an empty mall parking lot. No harm and kept going. We were going to Walmart. Story 37. On a 14,000-foot glacier in the Italian Alps, I just wanted to peek around the corner of a prominence, and I wanted to see if I could get down a bit to take a good picture. And the screen slid out from under me, and I was stuck in the face too far from anyone else, and I knew I couldn't use the gondola to get down. I did a controlled slide to a lower point that just got me in further trouble. And I knew my life was in danger. For 10 minutes, I hung there trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I spotted a rotting timber stuck in the ice, 40 feet below at an angle. I decided if I could get to it before my feet slid out, I could hang there until they found me. I leapt, scrambling across the face of a mini avalanche as I fell at an angle. I reached the board and I held on tight, but it came out of the ground and I started falling down the mountain. So I shoved the board under me and rode it down the glacier for nearly half a mile like a goddamn cartoon character. Somehow it worked. It deposited me in a talus field and I hiked back to the Refugio in time to see the Alpini mustering in the square to rescue me. They yelled at me something fierce, telling me how many people passed away in the mountain and how I could have vanished in a crevasse, never to be seen again. Then everyone forgave me and my uncle got me shots of grappa for my heroics. I was 19 and insanely reckless. That was 30 years ago. When did a feeling of, "we need to get out of here immediately," save you? I was getting a drink with a friend and he brought along his friend. When we left, I felt very intoxicated despite only having 2 drinks. They wanted me to come to their hotel as they were getting ready to go to a concert that night, but I made the excuse that I needed to get home because I think I left my oven on. My drink was 100% tampered with. My vision felt like I was in a tunnel. I got home in an Uber and immediately retched and continued to do so for the rest of the night. 2 drinks and a tunnel vision experience? Sounds like they were serving special edition beers. That was a very big bullet dodged. I'm glad you're okay. Story 2. I made a somewhat late-night trip to a convenience store that I knew carried wine. I used to work really odd hours, and sometimes late at night I'd finish my work and want to have a few drinks. As I was getting back in my truck, this young girl asked if I could give her a ride a few blocks back to her home. It was probably a bad idea to judge a book by its cover, but she was pretty young and dressed decently. Didn't act too weird or anything, so I figured okay. Well, I'm heading back and we get into a pretty rough part of town and she says turn left up here. Very dark street. Whatever. I stop and she says she really appreciated the ride and wanted to do something for me. Asked if she could give me a whistle. I decline and start getting sketched out, like she needs to get out now. She gets out and closes the door, and as I drive away, 2 men dressed in dark clothing were just stepping towards the street and stared at me as I drove past. Pretty sure that would have ended with a weapon in my face. That's what you get for being nice sometimes. Story 3. Not my feeling, but whatever. It was at the Goose Fair in Nottingham in the early 2000s. I was there taking pictures for my art course, and my boyfriend at the time fancied himself as a bit of a hard man. Liked to make out he was trained or whatever. Anyway, after about 20 minutes, he made me leave. Said that crap was about to go down. Huge eye roll. Whatever, dude. Okay, we'll leave. I see in the news the next day that a 14-year-old girl was terminated there not long after we left. Story 4. My friend and I had just seen a midnight movie. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I pulled into a gas station to grab a Yoo-hoo. I grabbed the bottle, turned around, and saw 3 men enter the store together. One waited by the doors, one stood near the register, looking at chips, and the third was crouched down with his back to the employee door so the cashier wouldn't see him through the square window in the door. They all look at me at once and then try to ignore me, acting like they're just casually positioned around the cashier and door. I walk up, put my Yoo-hoo on the counter. The cashier turns the scanner and basically tells me with his eyes, "You do it.
I ring myself up, drop money on the counter, and walk as normally as I could past the man by the door and nod to my car, what seemed like the furthest pump from the store. I sit down, throw my Yoo-hoo at my buddy, and hit the emergency button in my car that calls 911. I connect with dispatch and report a possible robbery. A mile or two later, I see a cop car flying down the street in the direction we just came. I called non-emergency the next day to ask what happened, and they said the men fled after I left, and the cashier told the police he knew he was about to get robbed, too, and to thank me for calling the police. I felt good. I didn't feel good was my buddy and all his nervousness about what was unfolding as he was listening to me recount everything to dispatch. Thought I just gave him a random yoo-hoo and chugged that thing down like a starving infant with a bottle. Story 5. We were hiking and geocaching up in North Michigan, where it's pretty rednecky in spots. We were at a designated trail with a small parking lot off on some weird side road, but we decided to check it out anyway. About 5 minutes into the trail, we noticed a game camera, but there was no ID on it. Game cameras on public land need to have ID info. We thought that was really strange. We kept walking a bit, but I just didn't feel right about the camera or walking in this trail, so we turned around and went back to the truck instead of walking the last mile of the trail. When we got back to the truck, this speeder pulled up with a couple in it. The guy was just a regular redneck, but the girl in his passenger seat 100% had the nod and was struggling to keep her head up. They looked surprised when we walked out of the trail and they sat in the lot for a second and then left. Pretty sure they weren't looking to go for a hike. My guess is that it was their camera and they get the notifications when people are on the trail so they can break into their cars. It happened to us on a family trip in Kentucky years ago, so maybe I'm just a little suspicious, but we decided no more backwoods hidden nature trails for us. Story 6. A couple of years ago, I was walking home from the bar at 1 a.m. I'm a young woman in her 20s, so this was instantly stupid, but I wanted to save money avoiding an Uber and was also intoxicated, so I wasn't thinking straight. I'm walking down a main but dark street, and then a pickup truck driving by slows down next to me. Two men look at me, and the passenger asks, "Hey, do you need a ride somewhere?" I lie and say no thanks because I'm expecting one in a moment. They said, all right, and drove off. I watched them drive down the street, and then a ways down, I saw their brake lights light up. There was no stop sign or stoplight, so I just assumed the worst and thought, I've got to get out of here. I ran into a tiny parking lot to my right and hid behind an outdoor vending machine. Moments later, the two men pulled into the lot and circled it, clearly looking for me. They couldn't find me, they drove away. I waited a few moments until I decided to call an Uber. Story 7. Up in the woods about 2 a.m., having a very large bonfire in midwinter. There were probably 7 or 8 feet of snow where it wasn't packed, and my friend and I were the only two sober. After about 45 minutes, we both looked at each other at the same time and went, something is wrong. Neither of us could quite explain it because we hadn't seen anything, but we knew there were animals in the woods. Grizzlies, wolves, and bobcats are all known to be there, but generally leave larger groups and fires alone. We managed to convince the roughly 15 intoxicated guys to head back to the trucks a mile away, as a group, knowing that at least the sober friend had a weapon on her and could use it. We got everyone into vehicles and everyone shipped back to town eventually. The guys who didn't believe us went back out in the morning to check that everything was cleaned up and found the tracks of a pack of wolves that had been circling the clearing. Story 8. I was about 11 or 12 years old at a neighbor's house. The sun had already set. It wasn't completely dark yet, but it was close and there was less light by the second. We were sitting on the lawn because we loved watching the sky turn from day to night, just talking and giggling and carrying on as little girls do. A truck drove up our street. Slower than usual, but not suspiciously slow. Still, I felt my guts sink for some reason I didn't understand. A couple minutes later, it passed by again, and then again after another few minutes, though not quite as slow this time. I was 100% positive it was the same truck, so I watched it drive away and noticed it started slowing down. I told her to get up, and when the truck made another U-turn and started heading towards us again, I told her to run and hide. I don't know if she realized what she was hiding from, but we ended up splitting in two directions. She dove behind a bush, and I crouched behind an old car parked in their driveway. We could see each other, and I had a clear shot to the door if I needed to dart in to get a parent, but we heard the truck roll up and stop in front of her house. Someone got out of the truck and started calling for us. I honestly don't remember what they were asking, though. We just kept our eyes locked and tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. Probably should have screamed, but I think we were both too scared. The person eventually got in their car and took off. We stayed hidden for what felt like forever, eyes locked until we finally felt safe enough to run inside. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't notice something and we booked it, or if that person was actually dangerous or not, but I'm glad that I'll never find out. Story 9. When I was 17, I used to go jogging early in the mornings. My then boyfriend lived about 7 blocks down the road, so I jogged to his house, then we'd loop around a park together before heading back to our respective homes. I started noticing a guy sitting in his car in the park, watching us run. After a week of this, I'd seen the same guy along my jogging route, close to my house, in addition to him being at the park. He'd sit in his car and watch me run, drive to the park, then watch me some more. My boyfriend thought I was being paranoid about it all. One morning, it was really foggy out. I started to cross the street, and as I was almost across, someone turned their headlights on bright and it blinded me. Instead of going forward, I stopped and started walking backwards, towards my house. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that the man who'd been watching me was standing next to his car with the trunk popped open. I noped out of there and went home. I never jogged there again. I reported it to the police. My boyfriend's stepdad insisted, but they didn't seem to care. 2 years later, a 16-year-old girl was taken, then driven out of the countryside. By the description of the man in the car, I knew it was done by the same guy who watched me jog. They never caught him. Story 10. I used to go to a local gay bar, but was not of age. The bartenders and bouncers let me in as long as I didn't try to drink any alcohol. I ordered a Sprite one night and saw a shady dude pull his hand away quickly when I had my back turned. Having a sketchy feeling, I took a small sip and decided not to risk drinking the rest. So I left it at the bar. About 30 minutes later, I felt like I was underwater and could barely keep my head up. Someone close to my age noticed and walked me home. About an hour walk, propping me up. He sat with me on my front steps and rubbed my back, platonically, for another 2 hours until daylight, making sure I was okay. His name was Billy, and I never got to see the guy who saved me ever again. Something very bad could have happened if it weren't for him. I still think about him. Imagine the bar's slogan. Come for the questionable drinks, stay for the unexpected acts of kindness. And also, don't trust anyone. Story 11. This was back in 2019. I was in college, and there was a really nice guy in one of my classes. A week or two in, we had to work together on a small project, and I was pretty excited about the opportunity to get to know him. After speaking to him, though, I got a really bad vibe from him, but nothing specific that I could put my finger on. I lost all attraction to him and knew that I should keep my distance. He approached me a couple of times after the project, but I made sure to be pretty cool or distant, though still polite. A month or two later, same semester, our professor, Mr. Baldwin, announced that the guy had been arrested for terminating a girl he had been dating, another student in our college. He gave us the number of the detective investigating the case in case we had any info to share. Story 12. This story is thanks to Mom's intuition. When my brother and I were young, maybe 10 and 7 respectively, our family was spending some time over the summer with my aunt in Central Florida. My mom had taken us for a trip to a super Walmart, and we came out with a shopping cart completely full of stuff for the couple weeks we were planning to be there. My brother and I were goofing around on our walk back to the van while my mom navigated the cart, when suddenly she said, "Get to the car, now," in a tone of voice that I hadn't quite heard before, which warranted zero argument from us kids. We quickly crossed the concrete median between parking aisles. We were won over as she unlocked the van for us to get in. We waited as she caught up a few seconds later and loaded everything herself and got in. She called her dad on her Nextel, lol. Immediately, she peeled out and told him that she noticed a particular car with 2 men in it pass by us when we were initially walking toward or into the store, which for some reason gave her very bad vibes. And sure enough, they had waited and began following us down the lot as we exited the store with a giant cart full of stuff and headed to our vehicle. My dad then called the police in the store to let them know. Lo and behold, some days later, 2 guys with that same car had been arrested for attempting mugging at that exact Walmart after multiple calls to the police had been made. Only as an adult did I realize the adrenaline rush my mother had to have experienced in order to physically pick up that shopping cart outright to bring it across the median as quickly as she did, instead of having us walk to the next cart opening in the median or walk all the way to the end of the aisle and come back with those guys following in their car. Who's to say what would have happened? It was plain daylight and quite busy in the parking lot. But one thing is for sure, mothers don't mess around when their intuition kicks in. Story 13. Decided to have a look at a covered stream that hadn't been down before. We weren't expecting it to be much, so no safety call out, weather check, or even bother to let anyone know where the entrance is. Get about 750 meters in and my buddy notices a load of water pouring in up ahead. We look at each other and go, "We need to get out now." In under 5 minutes, the water went from ankle deep and manageable to knee deep and almost pushing us over. We reached a section with some steps, a ladder, and a handrail for inspection. We managed to push the lid off with the water getting deeper every minute. If that ladder had been 10 meters further, we might not have made it. If we'd have slipped, gone. When we got out, it was raining gently. We were soaking wet and just looked at each other with that, "oh crap" look. A bit more above ground exploring and we worked out that the culvert went under a local canal. If we'd have slipped, we'd have ended up in a sump under a canal and likely never made it out. Nobody knew where we were, what was happening, or how to find us. A combination of stupidity and stupid good luck, I guess. Story 14. Not a get out of here, but a can't leave this like this moment. My girlfriend and I just picked up a bunch of metal fence posts and stacked them in the back of her car. As we neared being done, I had a flash of panic, realizing that the points were aimed right at us if we got in an accident. On the way home, we hit construction. We stopped at the giant flashing traffic light. The guy behind us didn't. We got rear-ended by an SUV doing 60 plus. I instantly had that same flash of panic and looked over at my girlfriend. She was fine. I looked down. I'm fine. Looked in the back. The fence posts are firmly wedged into the sides of the car after being slammed forward by the rear end crumpling. Story 15. Took my friend out for a drink. The first time she'd been out since having her daughter 12 weeks earlier. Had her round, and I went to the restroom. Came back to find her having drinks at a table with this random dude. Random dude looked at me and I felt flayed alive. Nothing in his eyes but malice. I grabbed my friend's hand, said loudly, "We're leaving now." I left immediately. I went back the next day to pay the tab we walked out on, and the bartender told me that the same man was arrested for attacking a woman outside of the bar. Story 16. I was walking home from 6th form one day and saw a car following me along the street. I was about 17. Got a really bad feeling, so I hopped in the next bus with a plan to change directions and head home at the bus depot down the road. On the bus, I got a text from a guy who'd stalked me for years on and off with a picture of my school taken just then, and the names and addresses of 2 of my friends. I freaked. Finally told my parents what was happening, reported it to the police. They'd driven over 100 miles to try and grab me and my friend, and had just missed us because I hopped in the bus and she had gone home early. He got 2.5 years in prison suspended with orders not to contact any of the girls involved. Immediately broke that order and got another 5 years on top. I'm really glad I got that bus. Story 17. Me and some friends were in downtown Vancouver watching Game 7, Stanley Cup Finals, at a pub. Vancouver lost and things on the street got a bit rowdy. My friend wanted to stay and wait for things to calm down, but I just had a bad feeling and said we should hop on the next bus to Kitsilano. On the way over the bridge, I looked back and saw trails of smoke from burning cars coming from the city. A huge riot ensued and it was absolute anarchy all night. They shut down transit shortly after we arrived home. Story 18. My college roommate wanted to go to a hangout. I immediately knew something bad would happen and I wouldn't let her go by herself, using the excuse that I would drive her so she wouldn't have to go into the city on her own and then not be able to get home. We got there, we're the only girls. She smoked some grass and I had a beer, and she's completely on her back. She was a lightweight and crossfading does that. I, on the other hand, was approached by 3 different guys trying to convince me to drink or asking if I had a boyfriend or whatever. While the third one is talking to me, I see another guy go over and get a beer for me. I've already said I don't like beer, I'm driving, I'm not drinking, but he hands it to me and I'm just gonna have one sip to get them off my back. Screw top of the beer that should have been closed was already open. I pretended to take a sip and then set it down. The guy I'm talking to asks if I'm gonna drink more. I say no. Within 3 minutes, I dragged my friend out of the house and had threatened one of the guys with my keys if he didn't get out of my way and let me into my car. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 19. In high school, at a very shady friend's house, playing cards in the kitchen, one of the house residents comes running through and out the back door holding several illegal items. He's followed by the 2 roommates also carrying evidence with them, with 2 cops hot on their heels. The cops chase the roommates out the back door, but one cop stops briefly and tells all of us at the table, "Don't move," before heading out the back door. We're all stunned and look around for a couple seconds before all 4 of us, without a word being spoken, jump up and run out the front door to a neighbor's where we lay low for like 3 hours until all the noise passes. Story 20. This is one of those strange events, and I just put it down to pure luck more than anything else. A few of my friends were leaving a house party one night. This was ages ago when I was in my early 20s. We were all on the road just having fun. Some of us were inebriated and some of us were just high on life. I suddenly got an urge to get off the middle of the road. This is a narrowish 1-lane aside road for apparently no reason. I am about 220 pounds at 5'8", physically pushed 3 girls off the road with my arms spread and got to the grass bank on the side of the road. The girls were just about to start complaining about me manhandling them when an idiot teenage driver sped past us in a decked-out cheap sports car. We would all have been mowed down if I didn't push everyone off the road. I wish the story ended there. Not even 5 minutes after he went past us, the driver of that car had swerved to avoid a stray dog on the road and crashed at around 80 miles per hour into a stone wall. He was apparently 15. The minimum driving age in my country is 18 and was the son of a millionaire. I bet the dog was just sitting there like, man, I just wanted to cross the road and now I'm a plot device in a near tragedy turned ironic justice story. And the dog was right. Story 21. I've had a few. The one of the most prevalent that comes to mind is when my older sister and I were kids. I was 8 and she was either 10 or had just turned 11. My dad had just bought a new house that wasn't finished being built yet, so we were staying at my grandpa's house for about a month while our new house was being constructed. My sister and I were playing outside when I saw this weird van pull around the corner. I'd been taught about creepy white vans in school, so when I saw it, I paid attention and took in the details. Everything except the windshield was tinted. The driver saw us and started to speed up, and I just told my sister we needed to get inside. Right as my sister got up, I looked back at the van and saw a guy open the sliding door and stare straight at us. We made it inside and locked the door. I peeked through the window and saw the van go slowly by while the guy who opened the side door was scanning the yard. I told my mom when she got home about an hour later, and while she said we were right to play it safe, and we always should, I hear her tell my dad later that it was probably nothing and we let our imagination scare us. It was a new place in a neighborhood we weren't comfortable in, so that must be it, according to my mom. The next morning, my grandpa woke me and my sister up and told us that there were cops down the street and that the little girl had been taken. And the police wanted us to tell them about the van we saw. Security cameras from a couple houses down saw the van too, and my grandparents' next-door neighbor also had security cameras that showed the van drive by with the side door open and a guy hanging out and looking in our yard. We moved into our new house before we got an update, but my grandpa went to church with a couple whose daughter was abducted. The van was found, along with the clothes the daughter had been wearing. If we hadn't trusted my gut, it would have been my sister and I. Story 22. I was on a bus in Romford, UK, and this guy was wasted, talking to everyone and being weird. My mates had a feeling things were getting dangerous, but I didn't feel it. We got off. Here's where the story goes bad because at 18, I was an idiot. As the bus pulled away, I shouted something dumb at it. The bus was moving, and suddenly the fire exit door at the back of the bus flew open, and the guy rolled out the door, hit the ground, and started running towards us, holding something. I can't remember if it was anything dangerous or if it just looked dangerous in his hand, all red-faced and angry. We scattered in different directions. I joined a queue to pretend I was going into a club. Some guys went down an alleyway. The guy went around the street shouting for us, me, to come out and face him, and even approach the queue I was in, searching it like something out of Jurassic Park. I kept quiet, and after what seemed like forever, he turned and walked off down the road towards where the bus had been to see if we were there. All of my friends were understandably furious with me when we caught up at our destination. The two that went down the alleyway were convinced he was going to end them if he found them. Nearly 20 years on, they still rib me about my lack of awareness and how ridiculously dumb I was. We got very lucky. Story 23. My mom's bad feeling might have saved me as an infant. She was walking with me in a stroller down her suburban neighborhood street. She says she started to feel a tingling feeling like she was being watched. So she decided to turn around and head back home. A few streets later, she noticed a car driving slowly behind her. The driver, a man, staring at her and me. She starts walking a bit faster and notices he drives a bit faster to keep up, so she gets really scared. Before she can start running, this is the 90s and she didn't have a cell phone, he rolls down the window and tells her not to run or stop because she's being stalked by a coyote. He saw her safely to her doorstep and then pointed out the coyote who had followed us half a mile and looked rangy and desperate. It had been slipping from brush to brush looking for an opening. So glad for her intuition and the stranger's help. Story 24. I had passed Amy Bishop, UAH, a biology professor, on the third floor on her way to the faculty meeting where she ended 3 of her professors and attempted to end more, as well as herself. She had always seemed weird and gave me chills. I was on my way out of the building, collected my things on the first floor from a previous lecture, and drove home to my apartment. I missed several calls in the short drive. Having missed so many, the first I returned was to my mom, who was hysterical. She just kept saying, "You're alive, you're alive." I was bemused by what she meant. I said, "Should I not be?" And that's when I learned people had been trying to check on my location due to the happening. Story 25. Well, I was on my first solo road trip to the U.S. when I was around 34. Male, straight. Stayed in a fairly remote Texan campsite and decided to go for a little trek, ending up hitting a park bay. It's about 4 or 5 p.m. and nobody else is around. Then some guy in his mid-40s rolls up in a van, starts talking. All seemed normal enough until he asked if I wanted to go for a ride and smoke with him. Politely declined. Then he said a bug went down my top. Without realizing, I lifted it, and he then commented on having nice chest hair. Said I needed to get back to my group and started walking in the opposite direction. Dude then starts reversing and getting a bit aggressive and insisting we go for a ride. I just go straight back to the trail and started running. No idea if he was just some strange friendly guy, a potential criminal, or if I accidentally stumbled into a meetup place for gay men. Glad I didn't stick around to find out anyway. Story 26. When I was 14 or 15, we had a class trip to a well-known beach a couple of states away for a long weekend. One night I was walking with 3 other girls down the main part of the city and a man approached us. Asked if we liked tattoos. We all said yes, and that we would love to get one, but that we weren't told enough. He said, "Oh, we won't worry about that. My guys do tats for anybody, as long as you don't tell on us." And dropped a wink. That's when I started feeling a little leery. He led us down an alley to a little hole in the wall with a big metal door. When he opened the door, there were about 5 guys in there with no light except for a little red light. My whole being said, "Get the heck out now." I screamed, "Run." And I ran until I got back to the hotel. I'm ashamed I never even looked for the other girls until the next day. A few days later, our class was shown a newspaper article that showed the guy that approached us along with several other men. They were arrested in connection with the trafficking ring. Our 14 to 15-year-old selves were almost trafficked. Story 27. My dad used to know really unpleasant guys. Well, he never did anything. He once told me about this one time when he would sell grass and other light substances. One guy didn't have all the money to pay him, but had something better to more than make up for the difference. They were at an island party during spring break, so they were at a hotel selling to the rich white kids. We're Hispanic. My dad followed him thinking it would be other kinds of substances he could sell. The guy leads him to a room where there's a passed-out girl. The guy says it's his girlfriend's friend and that she wouldn't remember a thing. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. My dad turns around and screams at the guy. Give him the grass, and then calls some of his friends over to let them know there's a white guy trying to sell a girl for things. So my dad and his friends then stay in that area, keeping an eye on her to make sure he doesn't do the same thing with anyone else. Because of this, he always likes to teach me things just in case, like the classic keys in between each finger for a stabby punch. Keeping your hand over the top of your drink and not at the base. Listening to how insistent someone is about me drinking, etc. Story 28. I first got my car when I was about 16 and incredibly naive. I'd gone to the local Walmart where a random guy had asked me for a ride. Now I'm not too keen on giving strangers rides, but he somehow convinced me to take him back to his house, which was on my way to my route anyway. I had this sinking feeling in my gut the entire time he was riding with me. When we finally got to his house, he said, "Don't move. I'll be right back with $40 for the ride." I don't know what made me panic, but I caught a whole wave of "screw this" in my gut. I hopped the curb in order to get out of the parking lot ASAP, and when I got about 200 or so feet away, I saw the dude in my rear view running outside with a weapon. Story 29. My dad is a truck driver and has always told me if you're on the interstate near a semi and smell burnt rubber, get away from them because they're about to blow a tire. One day while driving to work, I smelled burnt rubber. There was a semi next to me, so I sped up to get ahead of him. Next thing I know, I see a huge crash in my rear view with one car going airborne and flipping. I called 911 and then watched the news and papers the rest of the day. Thankfully, no fatalities, but it was nasty. The semi blew a tire, and the car next to it in the middle lane swerved to avoid the tire fragment and hit the car in the far lane, causing it to flip. I would have been right in the middle of it all. Story 30. Somewhat of the opposite, but this was over 15 years ago. I believe 2001 or 2002. My aunt had driven from Atlanta to pick me up for a week-long visit with my cousins. Everything seemed okay, though before we really got on the road, I begged her to stop at this gas station that still had full service. I was only about 13 at the time, but I really wanted to stop. It started to rain really hard while we were there, and I begged her to stay until she could see the road better. It only rained for about 6 to 7 minutes, and we were on our way. About 10 miles up the road, we hit the small town of Abbeville, AL. We saw smoke in the air, which alerted us to slow down. We pulled up to the only major intersection of the town to see was completely leveled. There were road guards wrapped perfectly around trees. A long-standing factory was now reduced to rubble. Gas stations were gone, as well as the high school. We called 911. The dispatcher had us sit tight and look for anyone in trouble. She informed us that about 10 minutes prior to our call, a tornado had run through and torn the town apart. What's scary to me was that there was no alarm or siren. The fact that we had made it there before any EMS always stuck with me because it could have been us, too. Story 31. I got my wisdom teeth pulled when I was 17. My mother didn't bother to pick me up, so I had to wait for the bus. Something felt wrong. My head was fuzzy and I couldn't focus. After about 10 minutes, a group of 3 guys walked up to me and started trying to convince me to leave with them. I couldn't talk, and they started grabbing at my arms and pulling me gently towards the shopping mall garage nearby. I think they thought I was intoxicated and that they could just ease me out of sight. On a Tuesday, that place was deserted. Up to this point, they had been nice but insistent. I finally said no. They got freaked out and let me go, and like a newborn giraffe, I bolted back to the dentist's office. The nurse called the police for me, and it turns out those guys were suspected in the area for mugging and mistreating intoxicated women, trying to get on at the bus depot at the mall. My dentist made it an official policy that nobody leaves after anesthesia without an escort after that. My mother was mad when the police called her and asked her to pick me up, but that's a story for another day. Story 32. My buddy and I snuck out when we were about 14, roughly 10 a night. We went out to check out this little field by my house, all surrounded by trees, and had a little creek running through it. I really wanted to see it lit up by nothing but starlight. About 1/4 of a mile away, I got the feeling of imminent dread. I gotta turn around, dude. I got a bad feeling. Oh, come on, Face McGee. You're just scared. Dude, I'm telling you, you can go there, but I'm turning around right now. All right, fine, wuss, he replied. The next day, we found out there was a mountain lion attack that ended a dude's 2 dogs who was walking. Where was it? about 1/4 a mile away from the field. When was it? About 10:30, roughly 15 minutes after we bugged out of the area. I have no doubt my subconscious recognized a big problem that I hadn't consciously noticed. Story 33. Greyhound left me in Santa Ana at 3 a.m. and told me to wait for hours alone for the next bus. Normally, I'm very selective when I call Ubers, but for some reason, something told me I needed to leave right away. I find out my hotel is only about 15 minutes away. Wow, a 4-hour wait? So I called an Uber. The Uber driver picks me up. I get in the car and tell him something along the lines of, "Man, they wanted me to wait 4 hours and the station is closed. What the heck?" He says he's glad I called him instead of waiting for the next bus. I ask why. He says it's a dangerous area, and a few weeks ago, another girl decided to wait for the next bus and they robbed her. Nobody found her until the station opened up again the next day. Now I always travel with pepper spray. Story 34. I'm 19, buying grass with a friend. We go to some seedy apartment in the Bronx for the third guy. Third guy wasn't really my friend, kinda like a childhood bully. We get to the building and walk up a few flights, and there's 3 guys in the stairwell smoking. These are our dealers. I'm uncomfortable as heck. One of the guys tells me to stop being such a little wuss. Third guy chimes in and says if I'm going to be a little wuss, I can leave. So I leave. Friend came with me. Days later, we find out the guys jumped the third guy. Took his wallet and phone, beat him up pretty bad. Needed his jaw wired for a few months. I'm a little wuss, but I still have my phone and teeth. Story 35. Not me, but when my mom was a teenager, she started to date this older guy that my grandma had a really bad feeling about. Not just a "I don't like that boy for you" thing, but a "stay away from him, something's wrong" feeling. She tells her not to see him, forbids her, prevents her from going over to his house. One night she sneaks out and goes to meet him. He said it was really important that he see her that night. She gets to his house later, swarmed with cops. She found out he was luring young women to his house and terminating them. I would say she learned her lesson, but my mom is a sweet soul. She's too trusting and gullible because I think she sees the good in people. Luckily, nothing like that has happened again, though. Story 36. A few weeks ago, I was in the metro with my friends and brother. We were going to a park to enjoy the nice weather. We were at the train for one station, and the train stops waiting for passengers. 10 seconds later, around 50 or so football supporters who were running from the police entered the train. They're screaming, laughing, mocking, and insulting at someone outside the train. We couldn't see who. The doors were supposed to close. They didn't. I swear to God, it felt like minutes. But 5 seconds later, the train gets surrounded by police forces, dressed in black armor and armed with batons and tear gas. I'm in horror. I look at my friends. It felt like 1 minute. 1 minute with my mind racing. Many thoughts came to mind. But it was just a few seconds. I heard her run and ran like heck. I didn't look back. So a few hours go by and I look at the news. These cops were pulling football supporters out, throwing them and them. Seconds after I ran from the train. While in there, I didn't see anything, but looking at the news, it was a horrific show of fighting. I swear it felt like minutes, but my friends told me it was 10 seconds max. Story 37. My then teenage son was hanging with a bad crowd. The overprivileged, undersupervised. They were up to no good. I suspected and I worried about him. Split custody and different parenting styles made it impossible to completely curtail his association with the group. After most of a year, my son suddenly began pulling back from these guys. No reason given, just cold turkey. A month later, his buddies were arrested for shoplifting. Cops searched the car and found substances and automatic weapons. Son saw where this was heading and pulled back in time. He's now a veterinarian and has a wife and a toddler. Oh, and no criminal record. Story 38. I was working as part of a BA team in a house fire. We were in the converted roof space, which was being used for a bedroom. We were standing in the doorway as the heat from the fire was strong and stopped us progressing further. As we sat in the doorway, I just came over feeling very unwell. Something wasn't sitting right with me and I was feeling very sick. I said to my partner, "Let's get out of here," and as we were going down the stairs, we overheard the evacuation whistle. We dropped everything and bolted out of the house in time as the roof collapsed in and crushed the first and second floor beneath it, right where we were standing. We got out with such speed that my partner practically threw himself down the stairs face first and had a minor hairline fracture to his elbow. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.